All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today, we have, of course, myself, Chair of the committee representing the 4th District, Councilman Burnett representing the 8th District, Councilman Cohen representing the 1st District, Councilman Costello representing the 11th District, Councilman Glover representing the 13th District, Councilwoman Porter representing the 10th District, and Councilwoman Ramos representing the 14th District. I don't see any other members of the council on the hearing. If I fail to see you, please speak up. All right, and representing the Office of the President, do we have Nikki Thompson on the line?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nikki. Matt Stegman. And Aaron DeGraffenreich. Okay, and representing the Mayor's Office, Natasha Mihu. And Nina Thamalis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nina. All right, this afternoon, the committee will have a voting session for Bill 21-0106, Study and Report Oversight of the Baltimore City Fire Department, for the purpose of requiring that the Baltimore City Fire Department, in consultation with certain other agencies, submit a report to the mayor and city council evaluating the policies, practices, and internal control systems of the department, and evaluating the potential establishment of an office dedicated to the compliance and investigations within the fire department, and providing for a special effective date. This bill was put forward by Councilman Burnett, and I understand we have a couple of amendments and changes. I just want to give the council an opportunity to brief us on the bill and the proposed amendments. Councilman Burnett, the floor is yours.
Sure. Do you want to pull them up? Oh, perfect. There we go. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. 06. Okay. So yeah, we've previously discussed this reporting bill. As you stated, that's what it does. I know we got a lot going on here, so I'll fire through just on the amendments. As previously discussed, the First Amendment adds 30 days to the reporting requirement, and it's pretty straightforward technical amendment. And the second amendment relates to feedback we got from the fire department, which in the original bill required them to report out on their management system that they do not use. And so we're basically substituting that in, indicating that software isn't used, so it's not necessary for them to include that in the report. Those are the two that we have, and they're pretty straightforward. I'll take any questions.
All right, any clarifying questions from council members? All right, I'll accept the motion to move the amendments.
So moved.
So moved by Ramos and seconded by Porter. Conway, aye. Councilman Burnett.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Costello.
Aye.
Glover.
Yes.
Porter.
Aye.
And Ramos.
Yes.
All right, the amendments have been approved. Is there a motion to move the bill as amended?
So move.
Second.
Moved by Glover, seconded by Ramos. Conway, aye. Burnett.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Costello. Councilman Costello. I'll come back to him. Glover.
Yes.
Porter.
Aye.
And Ramos.
Yes.
All right, Councilman Costello.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, that passes unanimously, and that will move to second reader at our next council meeting in January. All right, the next bill that the committee will be voting on is Bill 21-0107, Study and Report Operations of the Baltimore City Fire Department, for for the purpose of requiring that the Baltimore City Fire Department, in consultation with certain other agencies, submit a report to the mayor and city council evaluating departmental operations, fire suppression, and emergency medical services staffing, community risk reduction programs, and performance management programs, and providing for a special effective date. This was also put forward by Councilman Burnett, and we have a couple of amendments for consideration. Councilman Burnett, floor is yours.
Thank you. And again, just like the last bill, these are technical amendments based on feedback we've gotten from the fire department. So the first extends the reporting deadline outward at their request to give them more time to work on this, and also adds clarifying language around staffing models, pushing for comparable staffing models. Again, from the fire department, amendment number 2, again, technical in wording to align with their systems, inspection systems. And the third is exactly the same as the last amendment, number 3, which is, again, it was initially calling for reporting out on a management system that they do not use. And so we're just including that language in there as well.
All right, any questions from the committee? I don't see any questions. If I don't see you, please speak up. I'm unable to see folks while that document is up. All right, seeing no questions, is there a motion to accept the amendments?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ramos, seconded by Porter. Conway, aye. Burnett,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Costello. We'll come back to Costello. Glover,
Yes.
Porter,
Aye.
Ramos,
Yes.
and Councilman Costello. Now you got to pull the
Aye.
side. Excellent, thank you. All right, the amendments have been approved unanimously. Is there a motion to move the bill favorable with amendments?
So moved.
Move.
Second.
Moved by Burnett, seconded by Glover. Conway, aye. Burnett,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Costello. We'll come back to Costello. Glover,
Yes.
Porter,
Aye.
and Ramos.
Yes.
All right, and Costello.
Aye.
Excellent, thank you, sir. That passes unanimously and will be read for second reader at our next council meeting in January. All right, and the last bill that we'll be voting on today will be Bill 21-0164, the Decennial Fire and Emergency Medical Services Redistricting Plan, for the purpose of requiring the Baltimore City Fire Chief to prepare a decennial Fire and Emergency Medical Services Redistricting Plan, requiring the Fire Chief to present the plan to the Mayor and City Council, requiring the plan to be approved by resolution of the Mayor and City Council, allowing the Mayor and City Council to amend the plan under certain circumstances, and generally relating to redistricting in the Baltimore City Fire Battalions and Emergency Medical Services Districts. This is once again presented by Councilman Burnett, and we have a single amendment here. Councilman Burnett, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment came from the law department. Essentially, it was a typographical error in the drafting of the bill that said if amendments to the plan were to be made by the council, they needed to be done by resolution, which was incorrect. It needs to happen by ordinance. So this is in alignment with the law department's request.
Got it, simple enough. Any questions from the committee? Please speak up. I can't see you while this is up. Okay, seeing no questions, I'll entertain a motion to accept the amendment?
So moved.
Moved by Ramos,
Second.
second by Glover. Conway, aye. Burnett,
Yes.
Cohen. Councilman Cohen.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Costello,
Aye.
Glover,
Aye.
Porter,
Aye.
and Ramos.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously, and I'll entertain a motion to move the bill favorable with amendments.
So moved.
Moved by Ramos. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Glover. Conway, aye. Burnett,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Costello,
Aye.
Glover,
Yes.
Porter,
Aye.
and Ramos.
Yes.
This bill too passes unanimously and will be read for second reader at our next meeting in January. With that, I'm going to close all those hearings, and we will now hold a work session for the following two bills. Was there a question? All right. We're going to hold a work session for the following two bills: LO 21-0006, a quarterly crime stats and violence prevention plan, for the purpose of the committee holding a hearing quarterly to review crime statistics for the Baltimore Police Department and to monitor the progress of the biennial violence prevention plan. And we'll jump into our I guess technically fifth and final hearing after that, Bill 21-0040R, the informational hearing on crime prevention through environmental design. But for now, we'll focus on the quarterly crime stats hearing, and that was, of course, presented by myself. And in my opening remarks during the June 30th quarterly crime stats meeting, I projected that with the data showing a 141% increase in homicides during the 3-month period between March and June, that would put us on pace to eclipse 330 homicides by the end of 2021. And as of today, we have 323 homicides recorded with 16 days left in the year. And at this pace, it's very possible that my grim prediction back in June may then become an understatement. I've said it before and I'll say it again, we need to be doing better, much better. An extraordinary amount of our city budget and an extraordinary portion of our city workforce is dedicated to public safety and violence prevention efforts. Plans are one thing, but action and results are a totally different thing. The public rates the success of the Baltimore Police Department on whether or not serious crime issues are under control and whether or not people's fear levels are high or low. And while we understand that the police department is responsible for responding to crimes, we also recognize that even with the best policing strategies, the tools to tackle root causes, root issues in crime, rest with other support offices or agencies. We have a violence prevention plan from the mayor's office with some of the latest innovations in violence prevention and intervention. And this program, of course, includes the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, or commonly referred to as GVRS, which has shown success in similar cities and has even had some similar success during its initial rollout in Baltimore in the past. In my view, and I would argue in the view of Baltimoreans, we don't have much time to waste in implementing these plans. I want to give the Baltimore Police Department a chance to update us on their metrics and the progress that they've made on strategies that they are implementing. I also want to give the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement a chance to talk through their timelines for implementing their plans and new strategies, especially given the recently announced ARPA funding that they are receiving. It's my goal to drive our city agencies toward measuring success on the basis of outcomes achieved and not just outputs and productivity levels. With the shift, we can ensure that the appropriate law enforcement agencies and tactics are in place, and we can also be able to identify and address the economic and social stressors that drive crime, such as poverty, unemployment, housing instability, poor health, and lack of educational resources. So with that, I want to I'm going to turn it over to BPD. And just to give folks a sense of how I want this to flow, we're gonna focus on the first portion of this hearing on the quarterly crime stats. BPD will have an opportunity to present. Monsi will then have an opportunity to present, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from the committee. So with that, I want to hand over to BPD.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to all of the members of the council. Thank you for allowing us to come to you today to talk about all the things that we're doing. That you'll hear from a number of our deputy commissioners and other members of our leadership team today. I am not going to go into a long introduction. I will say, number one, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for number one, talking about all the things that really cause crime to be created in the very first place and how all of us together are responsible for it. And certainly the Baltimore Police Department and all that we're doing have a huge role to play, but recognizing that all of us together represent how we're going to reduce crime and address the alarming murder rate in Baltimore. At this time, I won't prolong the matter and turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Briscoe for the first part of crime stats.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present to you, and I'll take the next slide. As you see before you, and I'm just going to, for the sake of interest of time, sir, as you've stated, I'll go before you with the overview of crime in terms of where we are. And as you stated earlier, to date, we have 323 homicides against 316 this time last year. That is 182 against 691 from last year, down 1.3%. For the crime of rape, we're at 285 against 271 from last year, up 5.2%. And for carjacking, 487 crimes this year against 489, down 0.4%. For commercial robbery, 639 cases against 530 from last year, we're up 20.6%. For street robberies, 1,553 this year against 1,885 from last year, down 17.6%. For robbery residential, 487 this year against 484 from last year, up 0.6%. For aggravated assaults, 5,037 reported incidents against 5,019, up 0.4%. Arson, 106 offenses of arson against 100 from last year, up 6%. For auto theft, 2,905 against 2,782, 4.4% up from last year. The crime of burglary, 3,179 this year against 3,824 from last year, down 16.9%. And for larceny, 5,954 incidents this year against 7,167 from last year. We're down 16.9% in larceny. Next slide. Here before you is the homicide comparison, the total number that is on your slide, broken down by district. And I'll briefly go across. In the Central District, 23 incidents of homicide this year. Eastern, 46. Northeast, 21. Northern, 13. Northwest, 43. Southeast, 27 incidents. Southern, 42. Southwest, 50. And Western, 50 incidents of homicide. Next slide. Comparison for our non-fatal shootings. In the Central District, there have been 74 incidents. Eastern, 111 incidents. Northeast, 48 incidents. Northern, 38 incidents. Northwest, 68 incidents. Southeast, 55 incidents. Southern, 82 incidents. Southwest, 85 incidents. Western, 103 incidents. I'll take the next slide. And year to date, so far, we have arrested 117 suspects for homicide. 96 of those homicide suspects were arrested, had a previous record. 51 of them are violent repeat offenders. And there were 21 suspects that had no previous criminal record. For non-fatal shootings, there had been 132 non-fatal shooting arrests. And one of those 132 non-fatal shooting suspects arrested, 101 of them were arrested with a previous record. 54 of them are repeat violent offenders, and 31 of those suspects had no prior record. Where it relates to gun-related arrests, in 2021, there have been 1,302 arrests for handgun violation. That is down 2.3% from last year, where we arrested 1,333 suspects for handgun violation. The two additional columns to the right, of those 1,302 arrests, 1,180 were executed by patrol officers, and 122 of those handgun violation arrests occur from non-district resources. Our clearance rates this year for the crime of homicide, we're at 41.8% as of today. That is up from last year at 38.4% in 2020. Acknowledging the UCR comparative cities rate is at 54.7% as the national average. For non-fatal shootings, we are currently at 26.2% in terms of clearance rate for this year, and that is up from last year. That was at 20.2%. The top 10 violent posts in the city. And Mr. Chairman, I can read all of these if you would like. If you would like for me to just acknowledge the post, I can do that as well. I know there's a lot of data before you, and I know you wanted to move through this presentation. Do you have a preference, sir? All right,
Okay, we're gonna hold off on this piece because we're gonna actually have an in-depth discussion about the top 10 posts during SEPTED. I do have one question. We can continue through. I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
No problem, sir. Thank you for that guidance. So we're going to skip this slide. I just want to acknowledge that in this slide, you're looking at the top 10 violent posts by incident. You are also looking at the proactivity on those slides. And we have an example of, go back one, Michelle, I was speaking to. We have an example of the 331 post when we use the SEPTED information. This does factor into our decision-making when we are creating our crime plan focus at the district level. Next slide. And like same so here, you see the proactivity in terms of being mapped, that data that was before you previously. This is how it maps out for the proactivity in those in this particular geography, 331's post, as well as the officers' 311 calls for service that they've entered for support with some of those very issues that they have found on that particular post. I'll take the next slide, please. And we've added the additional slides of domestic slides, our domestic violence slides, and our youth violence slides. So year to date for the crime of homicide, we are at 18 for domestic violence, up from last year was at 14. Non-fatal shootings at 3, just slightly down from last year, which was 6. For rapes, 32, slightly down, well, down from last year at 51. Carjackings are at 12, up from last year, that was 5. Robbery, 12, I'm sorry, robbery 16, up, commercial robbery up from last year at 6. Robbery on the street for domestics, 135, slightly down at 141 from last year. Robbery residential, 231 this year, slightly up from last year at 217. Aggravated assault, 1,618, up from last year at 1,409. Arson at 11, up from last year at 8. Auto thefts at 48, against 41 from last year, up slightly from last year. For the crime of burglary, 170, up from last year at 151. And for larcenies, 290, down from last year at 338. The lower end of the screen, sir, youth violence year over year. For youth violence, we've had 13 victims of homicide that were youth, up 1 from last year, which was 12. For shootings, non-fatal shootings, 34 this year, up from last year at 30. For rapes, 61 this year, down from last year at 84. Carjackings at 12, up from last year at 7. Robbery commercial, 6 this year, up from last year at 3. Street robberies at 76, down from last year at 102. Residential robbery, 20 this year, up from last year at 18. Aggravated assaults at 329 this year, slightly up from last year at 321. There have been no arsons this year. There was 1 last year. And auto thefts, 9 this year against 3 from last year. And burglary, 16 this year, up 7 from 7 last year. And larceny, 62 this year, slightly up at 57 from last year. And those are our crime statistics from this year to last, sir.
Thank you. I want to pause here and open up the floor to questions from the committee. I'm sure there are questions about all the crime metrics, and I'll actually start off, if you don't mind taking down the presentation for now. Michelle, I think you have control. Thank you. I'll say first, I'm disappointed and of course frustrated with the violence that we're seeing. We're of course having a very tough year again. I'm going to ask this question again, and I know I asked this question probably now in the last 3 or 4 meetings that we've had with BPD. We've noticed a decline in violent crime in the northern and northeastern districts. Do we have any additional insight? Have we learned any more about what's working there, and which of those strategies, if any, can be applied elsewhere?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Conway. I know that you've asked that before, and we've taken the initial look at it. A deeper dive is before us to go through the data and the process. What I can tell you, and I've shared this thought with you before, is that those are 2 districts that are heavily residential. They have a great deal of infrastructure to help support the crime fight in terms of being able to respond in a preventative way and a response way. When they see patterns and trends, we tend to get more Metro Crime Stopper tip information or participation. We'll see an uptick in them as we go out when incidents do occur, and we're sharing that Metro Crime Stopper information with community. We'll see an increase, which correlates that when they're using that as a resource, though we may not know who the tipster is because it's anonymous. We just see the correlation between using that a resource as an ability to an increased tip response. I know that there are additional things such as cameras and more participation from community. When we see things occur, that's why I said it's a heavily residential set of districts that have more participation. And the commanders are really dialed in a way, and not that the other districts aren't, but they're working more collaboratively with community and stakeholders in a preventative way. And their community meetings are heavily attended. They're sharing more of the tips of prevention and sharing more of the information in terms of what they're saying that's happening in the streets day to day. And I also invite our Chief of Patrol, Colonel Jones, if he'd like to offer anything additional that I may have missed in my response.
No, ma'am, I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of that. I think the geography of the northern and the northeastern district is definitely what separates them from the other districts that have the higher propensity and have led historically, like your eastern and western. Unlike the northern and the northeast, when you're talking about the east and the west, you're talking about some drug trafficking organizations and crime drivers that are overlapping each other within a couple of yards. So then you have those beef. You have a lot of historical beef that goes back 10 plus years, individuals that are coming out. So that's kind of leading those districts, the eastern, the north, the western, the northwest, in reference to the larger population of drug trafficking organizations and crime drivers, where they're a little bit more spread out within the northeastern and the northern district.
So
And Also, sir,
I want to butt in a little bit because I'm not entirely satisfied by that answer, and I'll tell you why. The northeastern and the northern have been residential forever. Now that may be a factor in their success, but there's something that's changed in the last year. There's something that's going well or different in the last year. Of course, when we put that data up there, we're looking at 5 years of data, and to see, you know, a 30 or 50% decrease in violent crime, that's very significant. And it's not like we suddenly started building a bunch of new homes and tearing down commercial. That did not happen. The Northeast and Northern are generally the same. I'm really curious, Deputy Briscoe, you said something about Metro Crime Staffers tips. Are we seeing more tips come out of those areas than normal?
So we see more tips in terms of when I know districts are using that strategy, when they see an increase in of certain types of incidents or community calls, they'll use Metro Crime Stoppers as a vehicle, and then we'll see an increase. When I started my statement, I started with, we've taken a look at the data. I'm not suggesting at all that we've been able to dig through to find out specifically what is leading those districts. I think it's too early yet to tell from a statistical standpoint, meaning that I know that districts use LPR, but to be able to dig to say, was LPR a preventative that helped us get some of these wins? I can't scientifically say that yet. So I'm cautious on how I frame it, and that I'm not giving more detail because I've not had that bear out. I do know when things do occur in those two districts, they're deploying their LPR cars. They're reaching out to communities. So I know as action steps what the commanders are doing, but I don't know scientifically through the research or the data, if you will, how it's supported to say that this these two districts are different than the others. So I'm not suggesting that you be satisfied with the response. I'm just suggesting that we see the trends and we're trying to dig into more behind the whys and drawing the correlation between when we use Metro Crime Stoppers as a vehicle, and we're constantly reminding our community partners, and though they have been heavily residential, the difference is I know we're getting more participation, whether that's preventative or in response. And that's a place that we're trying to figure out, how do we quantify that shows in a way that this is indeed a part of the puzzle that's missing in other districts. So we're not quite there with the analysis, sir.
and I can help you out a little bit there, sir. I was actually a captain in the Northern for 5 years and a major in the Northeast for 4. At first, I'm going to use something that the commissioner brought up the last time. Both of those districts have universities that have their own police departments that are also a multiplying force. But the one thing I think that stands out, and it would be a good explanation, not to say that it is, but for the last year or two, is we've gone through COVID. So more people are home. So more of those people in the residential houses are home. So there's more possible witnesses there to see the things because so many more people are working from home, and we get more cooperation. And those two districts have the largest residential area. And I would assume, just guessing, that they probably have more people working from home, more eyes and ears out there that can give us more of the leads to help us solve more of the cases.
Yeah, I appreciate that theory too. I'm still not entirely satisfied by that either, if only because in 2020, when we saw spikes, when we're comparing 2021 to 2020, we still see that while people were home during 2020, we still had a pretty high violence rates. So I once again, I don't know that we're going to solve this here. I do want to make sure that we don't give up on trying to understand that. One, because whatever we're doing, I don't want to stop doing it. And then if there's anything that we can learn from these districts to apply elsewhere, I don't know if it's easier because it's a residential area to apply these strategies or whatever the case is, but I do want to figure out what that lever is so that we can put it into play. So with that, can we, as a follow-up measure, can we make sure that we get some actual analysis on it? I would really appreciate that. And I think it would benefit both the BPD and also just me generally and understanding what we're getting right.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, if I can interrupt, if we can overlay that with the vacant properties in the neighborhoods, because I bet that has something to do with it. I just have a hunch. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that would be helpful as well. My second question, and it was more something that I noticed as we were going through the slides, when looking at homicides and shootings across the city by district, we were looking at the 5-year levels and comparing it to what we know as the top 10 focus areas. The Western District has been pretty consistently the highest concentration of homicides and shootings, violent crime. But when we look at the locations of the top 10 posts, there are no posts on that top 10 list within the Western District. I was curious why, and what could lead us to that outcome.
the methodology for the post, so when we talk about the Western District is compact, and I'll invite Director Graham Campbell to come online about the methodology of the top 10 posts. But when you look at the Western District's violence, though high, it is desperate. It is across the district itself. So when you look at the top 10 posts, it is more than just the homicides and shootings. It is also the robberies. And so if you look at the Western District's crime overall that include robberies, they're down 16% overall. So when you think about the top categories that are comprised of the top 10 posts, if it were just for homicides and shooting, that picture would look different, but includes the robbery count, and they are down on robberies overall.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And
Hey, ma'am, Graham said he was muted. I think he's having audio trouble.
He needs to be elevated. Please,
So
Mr.
your name is
Chairman.
Graham
Campbell, please.
Graham Campbell.
Yes, the data driven. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I hope that answered your question, sir.
Yes, I think it begins to. And we're trying to elevate Graham now if he can provide any additional context. All right, Graham may have to sign out and sign back in. We're not able to elevate him for some reason. So Graham, if you can hear us, just sign out and sign back in. To that end, we'll come back to it, and if Graham would like to add any additional context to that, we can do that as when we come back to him. Are there any questions from the committee? Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about just going back to sort of the general slide, particularly around the youth piece. I can't even believe that there's only been 12 carjackings in the entire city. Can't believe it, because we had 10 young people arrested just in my district for carjackings. So can someone explain to me the definition of carjacking versus auto theft, and why the data is not showing what I'm seeing on the street?
So when you're looking at the crime of carjacking, this is saying that particular slide, Councilwoman Ramos, is where the youth was a victim. That's the victim slide, ma'am, that shows 12 victims that were juveniles that fit that category. Is that?
Yeah, that's helpful, but I still think when you go to the general slide, and I appreciate that clarity. I still think that the first slide that you had, let me just find it. I have to go back and forth because I can't see the slides on WebEx, so I have to see them on the other thing.
Year to date, we've had 487 carjackings as a city overall.
Mm-hmm.
That slide that you're referencing with 12 was the number where the juveniles were the victim of the carjacking.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
But I still think that I would still like this, the difference between the carjacking and auto theft. And because I do think that there's still some, I can't find it at the moment, some confusion around, at least for me, why one is classified differently than the other, when some of my auto thefts I think should have been carjackings.
So by UCR definition for carjacking, that is essentially a robbery, as in the person that was driving was accosted or intimidated to give over the vehicle and the keys, and they were robbed of their vehicle, which classifies it as a carjacking. When the car is stolen, it is not in the possession. It is not being taken from the possession of the person. The car is stolen, and that's not to say they may still steal it with keys, and there's a separation of time and place, but the person is not assaulted or accosted and then robbed of the vehicle. And I can provide writing the UCR definition if that is available.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can continue on this line, Deputy Commissioner, as you know, I've just had a lot of carjackings in my district, and I'm grateful to Major Homan, who has come up with a lot of partners to address it. We're doing really well, knock on wood. And also the Northern are working together, by the way. They work together very well with all of us. So I just, because I do think that the auto theft piece sometimes gets mixed up with the carjacking, and it may be not very clear. I just want to make sure that we're accurate in both of those, considering the issues that we've been having with it in my district.
Yes, ma'am. So by UCR definition, so the facts given by the victim, and by UCR definition is how the crime is classified. So we don't classify in and of ourselves. We are yielding to the guidance that's set forth by UCR, by the federal government, and our staff review team reviews the writing of the officer when it is written, and classifies that crime accordingly to include carjacking and stolen auto.
Yeah, if you could send me those, that would be great. Mr. Chair, I have a totally different question, but I can wait to the next round.
Sure. I want to actually pitch in with another question that's relevant, especially now as we get into the cold weather months. Of course, you guys are familiar. One of the easiest ways to steal a car is when you leave keys in it. As we get into the cold weather months, it's very common that you'll find folks will warm up their car, leave it running while they're still in their house or somewhere else. What are we doing to educate folks about that and get ahead of that problem, knowing that it's now cold outside?
Thank you for that question, Chairman. I can tell you we've been pushing that information out as a part of our prevention. It's happening in the commanders' meetings. As you know, that we have seen an uptick that's already happening. So in areas where we see it, we'll go in and try to engage in a preventative way, knock on the door, tell the driver. But if the vehicle is stolen and you have left your keys in it, that is a $500 citation. Along with of course, the loss of your vehicle. So we really try to educate the penalties surrounding the offense, that no community member has to needlessly suffer loss of their property. But we're sharing it on our different medians to include the consequence of the citation that'll be written when you've left your keys in your vehicle and it's been stolen. And that is not by UCR a carjacking either. That is a stolen auto.
I did not know that. We charge a fine for folks who leave their vehicle, their keys in their vehicle.
And that it is stolen. Yes, sir, we do. That is against the law.
Okay, cool. Any other questions from folks on the committee? Councilman Ramos, go for it. Sorry, you were in the middle of your second question. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious as to our strategy around illegal guns. Some of these young people that are carjacking are getting guns. What the hell is that even possible? If we could come up, with our, I know we're doing the violence prevention work. It's super important. I think the GVS is supposed to be part of this as well. I just want to be able to give a succinct answer to a couple of my constituents who've asked. The GVRS, excuse me, I didn't pronounce that right.
So I want to be clear on your question. Your question is, what are we doing about handgun violations and those getting guns? Yes. Okay. And thank you for acknowledging the work that we are doing in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement and our prosecution partner, the State's Attorney's Office. So there are many different strategies, but at the root of it is focusing on those people that are most vulnerable, that are, number one, previous offenders through our GORE, our Gun Offender Registry. We also focus on those that are recidivists with handgun violations. And our deployment strategies support when we see shot spotters, our response to it, what we're doing proactively in partnership to help address those that are likely to carry weapons. So there's several different strategies, whether it's through deployment and relationship, that we're focusing on geographies where we're known to have violence and known people are more prone to carry. And we're also training to ensure that our force is well versed in the characteristics of an armed person and that we're responding accordingly, whether that's through a call for service or through observations when we see them, or through a partnership to deal with those individuals that are most at risk for carrying handguns. And of course, being out to arrest offenders that are carrying handguns and working with our partners to ensure the appropriate penalty levels are levied. And so that's basically what we're doing to address handgun violations.
But I'm wondering, how are my young people getting the guns?
So you're asking how guns are coming into the city?
Yes.
So there's a multitude of ways that we're experiencing handgun, whether that is from other states that are being brought in, or whether that's as a result of them being stolen out of homes. Many of the guns that we're coming in contact with are guns that are stolen. And as you know, we have seen an increase of privately manufactured firearms, commonly referred to as ghost guns, things that they're acquiring through the internet and being able to assemble and use them as weaponry. We are, and correct me, Lieutenant Colonel Herzog, we're over 213, I want to say is the last number. I may be off, I don't have it in front of me. I know that we're over 200 in terms of privately manufactured guns that we have seized thus far this year. And that is up exponentially from last year, which speaks to the enormity of the problem and in part how we are getting them, because they're getting them to come into our city because they're coming from other states and through the mail and being assembled.
I think we're over 300.
Thank you, sir, for the correction. I don't have it in front of me.
Sorry, we're at 314 as of last count about a week ago.
There we go. See, I missed the front number, 314. And this time last year, we were in 2-digit numbers. So that just speaks to the enormity of the problem and the accessibility of the equipment to put together and make guns.
I believe the General Assembly has been trying to work on this ghost gun issue. And I will ask some of my delegates and senators about that. But what else can we, this is really disturbing, actually.
It is, but this also speaks to the need for the other work that and I'm not trying to glaze over it, because the reality is the prevention work is going to take relational work, because community members, family members know that something's not quite right, or these firearms may be in their homes. And so this is going to take a citywide effort, period, everyone involved, to address gun carrying and gun violence. Because they're, especially where our young people are concerned, because they're storing them somewhere.
Right. So the strategy is not only to try to recover the handguns, as we're seeing them, but also to work, more with preventing the whole thing from happening from the beginning. So, yeah, I appreciate that. This is a field I'm unfamiliar with, so I'm learning. But it's disturbing. And I've also had in my district recently a shootout in the middle of the street. That was super scary. And so, and we still don't know who that was. So it's people are becoming more brazen, and that's even scarier. So I appreciate all of your efforts, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of this. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions?
Yes, Chair Conway, I did have a question. This is Councilwoman Porter.
All right, Councilwoman Porter, and then Burnett, I see you afterward.
Thank you, sir. I did have a question related to the tip line, Metro Crime Stoppers. My office has received many emails and notifications about the Metro Crime Stoppers tip line in Southwest. And so I'm wondering what the process is for for residents to submit tips to the tip line? And is that Metro Crime Stoppers number district specific? I just needed more clarification on that, because as I believe a colleague earlier mentioned, in that northern area, I think it was Chair Conway, that upper north area has a considerable kind of participation as reflected in the data. But if you look at other aspects of the city, particularly the South Baltimore area, there's not really any data that supports or that not necessarily supports, but that really mirrors the uptick that we are seeing in the crime in that area, particularly in the southwestern area and the southern area. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? I'm so sorry.
No problem, Councilwoman. You are making sense, and that's really. I'm sorry. That's what I didn't know because somebody else. That's really what I was speaking to from an anecdotal lens when I answered Chairman Conway, in the sense that it is not district specific. It is a 1866 number, and it is a citywide number that pours in through a third partner that shares the information. Is what helps it to remain anonymous, and most importantly, it is not led up to the district itself to manage it. But to your point, you're not seeing the correlation between participation. That's also what I'm speaking on, what I'm saying, that certain districts are having certain results because they have more participation. It is not for a lack of use of the tool. When districts experience crimes or for preventative measures, that information is provided, and whether or not it is utilized is something altogether different.
So that, and I appreciate that clarification. There has to be a disconnect there, because we can't expect the public to use this particular tip line if it's not being managed by the third party properly and flowing up to the district. So, and do I have that correct thinking? Because no,
ma'am. Let me say it differently, because I don't want to confuse you. That information comes into a centralized point. It is shared with the district. It's not required for the district to manage it. Meaning that when a person is reporting out a Metro Crime Stopper tip, coming to the location, and the information is immediately provided to the district level to respond to it. And I'll let Lieutenant Colonel Herzog jump in for clarity. But no, it's being provided in the appropriate way.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So basically the process is this. There's a couple of ways that citizens can submit tips. They can do that through the online portal, where they can send that message in and they can correspond directly with Metro Crime Stoppers, or they can call that tip in and have that information entered in by Metro Crime Stoppers. As soon as that information is entered, it is sent right to our police department. So we have people, including myself and many people that are on this call, who have direct access to that. We get an automatic email notification, and that information gets forwarded directly to the detective who's investigating that. So it happens pretty rapidly. One thing, just to add some additional context to this in this conversation. So earlier this year, when we started our CJIC pilot in the Western, one of the big pushes that we did was we wanted to make sure that we were soliciting tips and information and giving the citizens those avenues of how they could submit tips. Our biggest avenue for that is Metro Crime Stoppers. And so what we've seen this year, since we have released this information, is that 9 out of the 12 months for 2021 have been higher than 2020. And so I believe it was overall, it was like a 43% increase in tips received since we put out a tip reference guide. And we shared that on all of our social media platforms. We shared that at community meetings. And you're going to see a lot more coming out about that earlier in 2022. But overall, we have seen increases in that. There's also some additional ways that BPD does not manage, but we still get that information, which would be like through our federal partners at the ATF text to tip line. They have an ATF tip line where we also will share their information. And then we also, the districts, you can share that information directly to the district by simply calling the desk. And we always will share our homicide number as well. And we do get a lot of people who will call anonymously down to our homicide floor and provide information. But I am very, very pleased, as I know everybody else on the call is, with kind of where we were at and then where we're at now, because we have seen that increase. Definitely not where, still not where we want to be. But definitely we've seen significant improvement in our Metro Crime Stoppers, and we have an outstanding relationship with Metro Crime Stoppers as well.
And just as a point of reference to back up, sorry, I had technical issues earlier. So the Southern and the Southwest districts are the two top districts for Crime Stopper tips in the city of Baltimore. The lead, this doesn't count homicides, to be clear. So if someone calls into the tip of a homicide, that gets routed to homicide separately. So the homicide number, which is the largest collector of tips for Baltimore, could encompass a bunch of different districts. But just to let you know that the Southwest and the Southern are the leading in terms of where the tips, location of the tips, just so you have that.
So I actually find that hard to believe, because we received information about the tip line actually not being workable in the past few weeks. And so what range of date, what's the reporting period for that particular data?
No, and so you are correct on that. There was an issue with the number that was used for Metro Crime Stoppers and how it was routed in. That issue was rectified, I believe, fairly quickly within a couple of days. So, but you are correct. There was an issue with that line, which we identified and did fix.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And for the gentleman before, if you could share the reporting period that you're discussing with,
Sure, sorry. So that was year to date.
Year to date. So
yeah, you're asking in the Southwest, right? So it was year to date. The balance, the largest chunk it looks like August, September, of those tips, but that was sort of, it's the largest year to date. Those were the numbers.
Sure. I would, Mr. Chair, if we could see at a future hearing, I'd love to kind of get a deep dive into that third-party process of Metro Crime Stoppers and how, where the process, but also how the information is routed and the outcomes of that information being routed to each of the police departments as well. And if it can be segmented by districts, that would be great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Porter. So we'll, if BPD can actually get that information to us for the next hearing, that would be very, very helpful. And then we're going to move on to Councilman Burnett, and I think I saw Councilman Cohen had a question after that. Councilman Burnett, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question was in relation to, I'm trying to pull it up, the slide around I guess youth violence, but particularly I was wanted more information on, so I'm trying to get it back up. I was having problems pulling up on my computer. Okay, here we go. Yeah, domestic and youth violence. So the rape stat indicates that there's been fewer year to date than the year before. So more of a two-part question. One, because I work very closely with a lot of organizations that provide assistance for survivors of sexual assault, human trafficking, things like that. And they're experiencing increases in calls for assistance, not really seeing a decrease at all. And so I'm curious how those two things could be out of alignment, particularly. And then the second question I had, because this in previous slide decks, we've had the closure rate for sexual assault and rape, and it's not included in this one. So two parts. What I guess how are these being classified, and why would there be a decrease? And two, where are we with the closure rate for rape, and sexual assault?
Thank you for that question, Councilman Burnett. What I can tell you is that I know we've had an increase in our survivor cases for sexual assault this year. So I do know more crimes are being reported. Where our rape overall is concerned, this year we have reported, I'm not looking at the slide, I'm looking at the XM, 282 as of Tuesday is my XM report, and that is up from 274 last year. The slide, as I stated, and I know you understand this, the smallest subset is our juvenile victims in that case of rape is 61 this year, 84 last year. So that is what what's been reported in. So the larger overall number for rape is up from last year. The smallest subset is the youth number, the juvenile number of victims.
So I'm confused. Wait, so I'm looking at the slide deck, it says for domestic violence year over year, rape, it says 32 year to date, 51 last year to date, which is different than what you just said, unless I'm missing it.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I thought you said youth. You said youth victim?
I was just saying the slide deck is on that slide. Sorry.
Right. So and when you look at, to your point, when you look at rape at 32, that is domestic rape. I first gave you the larger number. This smaller number is a subset. Thank you, Michelle. This slide here is a subset of the larger number of the offense. Is that 32 of the victims of rape are domestic related rapes, and 61 of the rape victims have been youth.
Okay, so yeah, I guess for future slides it'd be helpful to know what the total is, because I wouldn't
Yes.
read this as like a subset of anything.
Not a problem. In the previous slide that I started at the top.
Got it. Okay.
Yes, sir. 285 on your slide, but I read you today's number, which is at I'm sorry, 285 that's on the slide is most current.
Okay, so so that does align. It is up.
Yes.
So it would be in alignment with what we're seeing from service providers.
Yes, sir. That the crime of rape is up. However, the smaller subsets that are domestic related and youth victim are the other slide that we just saw, the smaller subset.
Okay. Okay.
You had a question, did I miss it?
Yeah, the closure rate for this.
And for the crime of rape, we're at 20% this year.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm caught up now. Okay. That's all I had for this round, Mr. Chair. I need to review that other slide so I can get caught up.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you.
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the members of the police department. Wanted to talk a little bit about some of the violence that children are experiencing. I think both anecdotally from visiting schools, as well as what we've seen on the city's trauma-informed care task force, just behaviors are a lot worse this year. I think young people going back to school has been really tough. Situations that may have been going on at home, but just hearing kind of all over the place that young people are really, really struggling from a social and emotional standpoint, and also seeing some of the data on kids who've been killed and kids who have been involved on either side of violence. So was curious, I know this is somewhat outside of your purview, but does that feel right to you all that I think our young people are like struggling generally right now? And is there any specific strategy that you all have engaged to try to better connect and prevent harm from coming to children in Baltimore?
Thank you for that question, Councilman Cohen. What I can say to you that it's never all right when any of our community is suffering, especially our young people. I know that through our teams, there's a lot of work happening through relationship to help support our young people. So I know that Lieutenant Colonel Brown is on this call, and she's on a great deal of youth advisory boards and task force to try to help bridge the gap between how we show up and our partners in terms of what we need. So that there are like for instance, we do a work with school police, because when they're in the schools and we're seeing our young people, whether they're victims or offenders, we're talking to them about the same class of young people and how they can be supported when they show back up to school with the school social worker. And I know that we're reaching over the aisles to our other partners. Not that they have to be in the system of offense through DJS. They put their resource umbrella to the front of the door to help us deal with young people that are not offenders, where possible that we could help to point to relationships. But the reality is we need more relationships, because what you're seeing, whether it's related to other trauma or COVID, being out of the routine, not being in school, young people are struggling and suffering across this nation, and that's showing up in some of the other health supports needs, that more young people are going to other health services to support them. So we do a level of outreach and engagement, but I cannot kid you, because we're not outfitted in that way, we're generally trying to connect young people to other resources. But we are going through training to be able to see the signs and signals, to be trauma informed, that we have the appropriate response and that we're providing the appropriate resource outlet to our young people. Question.
Thank you for that. Just to go back for one quick second, you said the DJS, Department of Juvenile Services, is I think you said more at the front side of the door.
Yeah, so let me explain that without colloquialism. So previously, they had their resource umbrella was only available if a young person was brought in as a result of an offense. One of the things that we see is that there's not that level of accessibility to resources if the juvenile has not offended, but they need help. Because we can see that if a child is kind of acting out or out in harm's way, hey, what other resource? So we'll use that relationship as a resource umbrella to help point, is there other services or supports that this child has not become a problem. We don't want the child to be a problem or at risk, and we don't want them to offend to get help. Can you help point us? So we've used that DJS relationship to help point us to other resources that may be available for young people when we're coming in contact with them and someone else may not be readily available to us.
Got it. I guess I'm just sort of wondering why Department of Juvenile Services, like, to me, I'm not sure that would be the resource that I would turn to for young people who are not offending or getting into trouble. Like I think we have so many, very, very credible nonprofit organizations, our library system, our Rexham Park. I mean, the work that folks are doing around the city in trauma. Just curious, like, why DJS? Like, to me, I would find that to be sort of a strange place to go to address needs of young people who have not offended or gotten in any kind of trouble.
So to your point, we point to all those other relationships, whether they're nonprofit or government. Oftentimes when officers are working, everyone isn't always available on a 24/7 clock. That's just one example of a different type of relationship that we'll tap on to get access to resource information to assist us when we're dealing with young people. It's not the only relationship or resource we go to. We tap Park and Rec, we tap Monzi's office, we'll tap the Family League resources and say, is there anybody in this portfolio of grassroots organizations? Is there a community center or rec center? We do that, but we also use a non-traditional partner like DJS that has umbrellas at their fingertips, relationships at their fingertips, to help guide our officers, even for children that are not in harm's way. That for me isn't strange, it's non-conventional, because everyone isn't always available or working.
Okay. Appreciate it. Again, not sure DJS would be my first stop in terms of resources for young people, but appreciate that you're looking for partnerships, and would again just say that I think across the city, I think young people are having a hard time going back to school and just dealing with post-COVID. I agree with your point. This is not just unique to Baltimore. I think this is a national trend, but all we can do to support our children in this moment, I think, is really, really important. Thank you.
And thank you for that, Councilman Cohen. And I'll hold myself to task on this one. I'll make sure I have a conversation and collaborate with you outside of our Park and Rec partners or a city government partner. If there's another relationship that I can add to the catalog of relationships and Rolodex to hand out to patrolmen, I'm happy to work with you to make sure that we are exhausting it all. But the challenge again has been for instance, other partners has been availability, caseload, and when we come across it while officers are working and it's after 4 or 5 o'clock, what other relationship or resource is available. Happy to work with you there, because I agree. Our young people are struggling and suffering. We're seeing that. We need to help them, and we need help in helping them, because many of them do not belong in the criminal justice system, and we want to have the lightest footprint possible in their lives. And the only way we do that is have relationships to work with. Happy to partner with you on that. So thank you.
Great. Would love to have that conversation offline. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Cohen. Any other questions before we move on? All right, I'm going to move forward, and just to give us a little, give everybody a little insight on how we want this to go. I know we're going to dive into some of the recent questions from the audit finding about evidence control. I want to dive into that next. We do have the hearing after, in which we'll talk about SEPTED. So I'll let BPD begin moving forward on that. I don't think we're going to go into a lot of the staffing conversation today, if only because I want to be cognizant of questions that folks may have. And I hope that we'll have the opportunity to have that discussion at our next hearing. And then also we want to have Monty have a chance to talk as well. I know they have a lot to add to this conversation. So without further ado, BPD, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Chief Yeager. I have in my office with me also Director Alan Robinson. He's Director of Crime Scene Sciences and Evidence for the BPD. So briefly wanted to go over the audit findings. There were 8 total. And I wanted to start with saying that, we always welcome opportunities for other people to look at our system and see how we're doing and see where we can make improvements. In this case, in this situation, this audit period covered from 2014 to 2020. Many modifications to our practices and modifications, improvements to our collective system in evidence control happened after this audit period, and so of course that isn't reflected in the audit findings. And I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that there have been issues with evidence management going back for years and years. And I was brought on in 2016 as part of trying to fix this. So myself, along with the rest of the executive, PC's executive team and my team have been working diligently to fix some of these issues. And even though we are making great progress, it's going to take some additional time and resources to fully go back and get everything corrected. Next slide, please. So the audit's findings, the first finding was BPD's written policies and procedures did not require routine physical inventories and audits to ensure all property is accounted for, and complete physical inventories and audits were not being conducted. So that was correct at the time. We have since modified policy 1401, which is the policy governing property and evidence for the police department, that requires our personnel to conduct routine sample set inventories because our inventory right now is too large to conduct a full inventory. So we conduct sample inventories and we have a SOP that's been developed for them to do that. We also have been working to identify funding sources to cover the significant expense of a full, complete inventory. And just a word about that, the last complete inventory was completed in around 2009, 2010. And the International Association of Property and Evidence recommends that be done annually or whenever there's a change of command. What we have found, though, is that the expense for this, the $70,000 12 years ago, is now unmanageable at this point. We reached out to a couple of different entities and that specialize in this kind of thing and found that they primarily will work with property and evidence sections that have around 50,000 items. And we estimate that we've got over 2 million. So we haven't been able to find anyone to do that. So even if we were able to find funding for it, we're not able to find that much funding for it, or even a proper entity to do it. We are exploring some other opportunities or other options where we may be able to use overtime to conduct a rolling inventory. And one other thing that was started back in 2018 was I called them micro audits. So I had a small team of people that would go in and conduct weekly. They would pull a shelf of a shelf of inventory and compare that to what we were supposed to have in the system to find out what we did have, what we didn't have.
Chief Yeager, I hate to interrupt you, but I do want to move through this pretty quickly. We have quite a bit to cover.
I'm sorry. Okay, so finding 2, BPD's policies and procedures did not require regularly scheduled reviews of confiscated property to identify items that could be disposed of or returned to owners, resulting in items held unnecessarily for extended periods. This is something that was corrected with our new evidence management system. It allows us to get review on items automatically based on when an officer submits them. It's providing us with a new tracking tool and a notification tool to help improve our response times in getting items back. Next slide, please. Finding 3 stated that the BPD did not have an effective procedure to ensure all properly temporarily transferred out of its property room was accounted for and returned. Again, with the new system that we have in place implemented in March of 2021, we're able to track that information daily. Sensitive items such as firearms, drugs, and money are required to be returned every day if an officer checks it out for court. Other items that are transferred out for continued investigation, the new system will automatically notify members of Evidence Management Unit to follow up with those items after 30 days. Finding 4 stated that BPD did not enter all required data into the property records for confiscated firearms, could not support the destruction of numerous firearms, and did not report all destroyed firearms to the Maryland State Police as required. Well, this was primarily a training issue and also had to do with the evidence management software that was implemented in March of 2021. So we have trained our staff at the counter to properly enter all the firearm information, and we have implemented a small team inside of Evidence Management Unit to report all destroyed firearms to the Maryland State Police as required by policy. The second clause about could not support the destruction of numerous firearms is not entirely correct. What they found was that some of the documentation that we had did not have all of the signatures that were required going back years. And that was something that was addressed after my arrival. Next slide, please. 5th finding was that BPD did not have procedures to independently account for all funds seized and recorded in its property records on a periodic basis. And we have worked with our fiscal team. All money that is received in evidence, property and evidence, is deposited weekly. And those receipts, once they're verified by the bank, are sent to our fiscal section. And fiscal is reconciling those books. I believe they're going to do that on a monthly basis. The next finding was that BPD had not established a formal comprehensive training program in relation to its property and evidence management operations. And we do currently have a formal onboarding process for new employees that involves the International Association of Property and Evidence. And that's kind of the governing body for property and evidence management. And we've also implemented refresher trainings for tenured employees so that they are brought up to current best practices as well. We're also requesting funding for the industry virtual training modules for all of our personnel. Next slide, please. Finding 7 was that BPD lacked formal policies and procedures for maintaining and tracking certain critical documentation relating to the seizure and return of property, and did not adequately account for funds maintained in escrow accounts. And this was 2 parts that they found. The first part refers to 2 different things: the Form 56, which is the property and evidence receipt, and the Form 57, which is the property seizure form. The Form 56 is maintained by evidence management, and all of those forms are digitized and included with the documentation in our new evidence management system. The Form 57 is for officers on the street to officers seizing property on the street to give a copy to the individual they're seizing from and keep a copy in their case file. And I believe they are working with the new records management system to figure out how to integrate their Form 57s, digitize them so that that can be tracked as well. Part two of the question was the account referred to the accounting measures, and we do have a policy that was adopted about 5 years ago where money is deposited weekly. Prior to that, it would collect in evidence management unit, but we no longer do that. Money, for the most part, is deposited weekly unless it's unless the money is evidence. Next slide, please. And the last finding was that BPD did not maintain adequate documentation to support one of 17 program expenditures totaling $1 million. And this was an expenditure for overtime, and it dates back to fiscal year 2016. And BPD no longer uses that practice. They don't use the practice of using federal asset forfeiture funds for overtime. And this was also discussed during the 2018 Department of Justice audit. And in that case, the DOJ asked BPD to pay back several transactions, but not this one that was found. So that's just a quick overview of the findings and what we've already done to improve. And I think that concludes my part, unless there's questions.
Thank you. And do you mind taking down the slideshow? So I'll open up the floor to questions for folks that may have questions. I know I have my own and more requests than anything. Of course, and I've had an opportunity to meet with BPD in advance of this hearing. Of course, this is a pretty embarrassing audit. Fortunately, a lot of this were policies, procedures that happened before many of us got here. That said, I think it's imperative that we get on top of all these things as quickly as possible. Some of these things we've already begun making changes. I think it would be really, really helpful for the committee and certainly myself to understand for those changes, which of them sufficiently addresses the audit findings for each audit, for each finding, for each of the 8 findings. If we could report that back out for our next hearing, I think that would be incredibly helpful. And you know, once again, I think as we continue to uncover problems, I think it's incredibly important that BPD continue to be honest, open, and forward about the issues that we discover, so that we can immediately jump on top of those issues. And so I appreciate you, Chief Yeager, for immediately jumping on top of these issues. I do want to make sure that we get to the bottom of them. I think trust in the department and in the management of certainly evidence and guns is absolutely critical for the reputation of the department. So I want to leave no question about how we manage our evidence. And I ask that for our next hearing that we get very detailed updates on each of those audit findings and the absolute resolution of each one of those. Many of the issues I understand require technology upgrades. They also require additional people and otherwise. Those things I think are important, but I think overwhelmingly what you see across those audit findings are lack of systems or lack of actual use of those systems. So I think it's important that, of course, those things are going to be important, having a budget, having a technology solution for managing evidence. But one thing that costs us almost nothing is having a system for us to accurately and appropriately address all those problems. So I would absolutely love to see that for our next hearing. Not so much a question, more a statement. But thank you so much for walking us through that so far. Any questions from the rest of the committee? Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues. This is the first time I'm seeing this, so I feel like I need to absorb a lot of this and try to get out of the cop show mode that I used to watch and into what exactly happens here when you've got the evidence. We have a low clearance rate, although it seems relatively stable with what's happening nationwide. But doesn't that, if a lack of management of evidence also, means that we're not able to provide the right evidence for prosecutors. This is all connected to that particular piece of being able to make sure that we have a clearance rate. Is that right?
Thank you, Councilwoman. I don't believe that we've had any issues with the State's Attorney's Office and successful prosecutions. If there have been any issues, none of those have been brought to my attention. As I mentioned previously, most of these issues have been evaluated and are in the process of or have already been resolved. But the management of the evidence, once we receive it within Evidence Management Unit, is fairly solid. What we have, and whenever we have requests from either defense attorneys or prosecutors to come see the evidence, we have an entire SOP devoted to how that process goes. So one of the findings, and again, the audit was from 2014 to 2020. So many of the findings that they observed were historical from years ago before some of these new processes had been implemented. There's Policy 1401 governs the Evidence Management Unit. And then within that, there's also our SOP, which is, it's really a living document that we base on best practices. So when something is found to be deficient, we go in and correct those procedures so that everybody is on the same page. So if a defense attorney or a prosecutor calls and says, "Hey, I want to see this," our staff can go to the manual and look, here's the steps we need to undertake to do this. But to get back to your original question, I'm not aware of any issues that we've had with evidence at for prosecution.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilman Ramos. Any other questions about the audit findings, about evidence control, anything like that from the committee?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the audit findings, how they are, you all have put many processes in place as a result of these audit findings. Can you speak to the QA processes that you put in place so that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, Alan, you want to speak? I'll let Director Robinson speak to that since he's been more intimately involved.
Sure, thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, committee. Alan Robinson, Director of the Crime Scene Sciences and Evidence Control. I was the Deputy Director over Evidence Management for the last 2 years. So when we talk about the quality assurance pieces that we put into place, so a lot of the audit was talking about us not adhering to policies that we've already had in place. So one was starting with the education of folks as far as what the policies state and what their expectations are from a frontline standpoint through a middle management and onwards standpoint. So what everyone is responsible for at each level. So when we talk about, let's talk about, and I apologize, let me pull up the finding really quick so I can give you a specific example. Talking about the inventory aspect of it. So I'll just go over that rather quickly. So we talked about the inventory. By us implementing these quarterly sample set inventories where we're actually using personnel to do an inventory of the general property area and our vaults. Our vaults include our firearm, our controlled dangerous substances, which are our drugs, and our money, as well as general property. Remember, not everything that we receive is actually evidence, is actually general property that may have been confiscated or retrieved from the scene. So when we're talking about this overall audit, they're talking about everything, the totality of everything that we receive, but not everything is strictly evidence to a case. It is actual property that we may have received. So by us reviewing daily to see what evidence or property may have been taken out for further investigation, we're following up on that. So it's we've incorporated checks and balances along each line, from front line to middle management on up to Deputy Director and myself. So was there a specific one that you were interested in? I mean, I could talk to you them and
Yeah.
I want to get kind of specific. Was there one? Was there one in that was more important?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Not one in particular, just from an overview perspective. Speaking to some of the QA, this QA process from an overview perspective, not like getting into individual tasks, but now with your clarification, you just said that your QA is dependent on the line item that you are working. So you have like multiple QA strategies and protocols for, that's what you're saying.
That's what we're saying. And like I said, it started with training and making sure everyone is aware of what the policy states, making sure that we are constantly reviewing that policy and everyone understands their role in the life cycle of property and evidence. One of the things that was glaring was us not reporting to the Maryland State Police the number of firearms that had been destroyed. When we talked about, we understood exactly how many firearms had been destroyed. We could account for each and every firearm that was destroyed. What happened was there was a breakdown in the procedure in which it may have required us to have 5 signatures, but we only had 4 signatures approving it. However, we did have all the proper documentation, all the proper witnessing of the destruction of those firearms. So from that standpoint, what we said we destroyed, we destroyed. It's just that procedurally we didn't follow our process that we had in writing. So we remediated that by making sure internally our legislative compliance unit, in addition to all of the other reporting that they're doing to the state, they're also including the destruction of the firearms to make sure that that's handled internally. So we're putting more oversight on those things to make sure that they are occurring as they should be.
And Alan, if I remember correctly from our conversation when we initially discussed this, it was a matter of in our procedures, I believe it said that the police commissioner needed to sign for every individual gun that was being destroyed, and that had not been happening. And so we didn't follow our own procedure.
We did not follow our procedures, like I said, and Chief has alluded to. This was all historical items that were taking place prior to many of us actually on this call being with the agency or in this position to make decisions on what was going on in that area. So that's what the issue was.
And just to sort of, is that still an appropriate procedure?
To have the police commissioner himself sign?
Not that I'm asking you, Commissioner, but do we need that every time? Or I have no idea how many guns we're melting and how much that takes out of your data to do that. But is that really necessary every time we need to melt guns? Should we change our procedure? Is a better question.
Part of what we are looking at with all of our policies as a holistic process. We look at all of our policies on a regular basis to see if there's still a need to update them, make them more current. And so, this is something for which, we are taking a look at whether or not it's absolutely needed or whether or not the chief of science and evidence can be a sufficient level of authority in signing this off. Part of what the commissioner has done is restructure our organization in a holistic way. So our policies as written from prior years doesn't necessarily envision how the department is now structured based on how Commissioner Harrison has restructured some of these authority lines. And so, yeah, we could take a look at that. For us, though, what the audit was simply doing was looking at the policy as written, asking, had it always been followed since 2014? And again, in the areas for which these findings occurred, in instances for which it did not follow those policies, then that's where the findings were.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Councilman Porter, I jumped in there.
No, you're good, Mr. Chair. I didn't have any other questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, any other questions from the committee before we move on? I know we want to get to Monty. All right, we're going to turn it over to Monty. I know if Director Jackson is still on.
All right, thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. And Michelle, can you give presenting authority to Director Jackson, please?
I don't think I have that capacity to give it to someone else.
If you can give it back to Council Service, if you give it back to Sam, he can make sure to transfer over.
I don't know how to do that. There's no option on here to give it back unless I'm just missing it.
I think he figured it out. Sean,
Sure. I'm still waiting for the authority. It looks like it's coming through now. Bear with me.
Okay, excellent.
If it's any help, I just lost authority to do it, so it should be coming your way soon, Director.
Thank you. If folks wouldn't mind letting me know when you can see my screen.
It's coming up. It says, John, you're starting to share content. The screen is black. It says we're viewing a reverse screen, but it's black. There we go. We can see it.
Can you see it now?
Yep.
This is what happens when you share Wi-Fi with an entire house. I appreciate your grace. Thank you. I'll jump right in here. What you all are looking at is a replication of the slides that you all saw the last time we had this quarterly review, with a couple of changes. And unless the committee is interested in hearing my report in a different way, this will be the way that we share our progress going forward, with a spotlight at the end of every presentation. The spotlight today will be focusing on where we are on the group violence reduction strategy. So with regard to pillar 1 of the violence prevention plan, which is the public health approach to violence, you'll see this indicator here showing kind of a line in the sand of when we launched the plan and where we are in correlation to when that launch happened. You'll also see in this first column all of the deliverables that are associated in the first year of the violence prevention plan and what the status of those were the last time we presented to this body on September 29th, compared to what the status of those items are today. Green indicates that work is in progress. Black indicates that work has not started. The blue with the check mark indicates work that we've completed. And then this goldish color indicates that while the work is in progress, we're not as far as we anticipated being when we created the timeline. And so I'll talk to you today specifically about the items that have changed from our last update. I'm happy to report that in partnership with the Baltimore City Health Department, that we have been able to expand the child fatality review team in order to make sure that we've got executive level accountability across city agencies and quasi agencies to make sure that we're implementing policies, procedures, processes that intervene when we need to at appropriate times, when we see issues that could potentially result in the loss of life for our children, or outcomes that we don't want to see them have to deal with. This is obviously something that sits really close to us now, given some of the names that we've seen and the ages of the names that we've seen that we've lost this year, specifically thinking about Davin and Danira, who we know were 6 and 8 years old, and who had been brutally murdered by their mother. Thinking about Malaya, 13 years old, who we know was gunned down at a rec center. And so thinking about the things that we could be doing holistically, systematically, to prevent these outcomes from happening. So in the coming weeks, the 5-year child fatality review report will be published. And in that report, and the health department is on the line, and they'll talk a bit more about this. It might make sense to have them do that now, sir. We'll also be talking about the recommendations that we're making for immediate change, and then long-term recommendations in order to improve the outcomes of lives lost. In the 5-year period, we know that 208 of our children, our city's children, lost their lives. Not all to homicide, overwhelmingly to homicide, but not all to homicide. But making sure that we're doing the work um, in ways that hold us all accountable for what those life expectations and outcomes are. What partners from the health department are interested in giving a highlight here about what the council should expect on the child fatality review? I think we might have Kathy Costa representing the health commissioner with us, sir.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Director Jackson. I am really looking forward to releasing our 5-year child fatality review report. As Director Jackson shared, we have findings from 208 case reviews, as well as some priority recommendations for the city to undertake in order to prevent violence and child fatality. In particular, we've elevated 5 recommendations for the next 6 months, and then a larger set of recommendations for the next 3 to 5 years. But the recommendations related to the next 6 months involve developing a 2-generation intervention for families involved in the drug trade that uses highly credible staffing. Working with city schools to determine the number of youth who have multiple school-based risk factors we've identified, and creating a system so that we can identify them early and intervene. Holding Medicaid managed care organizations accountable for adhering to existing policy around well child care. We're seeing families slipping through the cracks in well child care, and that's leading to child abuse and neglect deaths. Continuing the Be More for Healthy Babies Safe Sleep campaign aimed at reducing sleep-related infant deaths. And then really something we need to work on immediately is an MOU outlining information sharing practices across investigative agencies and a policy for multidisciplinary staffings following child deaths so that we can improve our investigation and response.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
So I'll keep moving through pillar 1, sir. I'm jumping into the launch of the Reentry Action Network. While this work is still ongoing and we've had conversations with jurisdictions who have similar reentry action networks or reentry councils, we are behind from a timeline perspective with regard to where we want to be. We are still in the process of negotiating the contract that we spoke about around the Returning Citizens Behind the Wall initiative with the Department of Public Safety and Corrections, and that negotiation is going well. We're waiting for documentation from them at this point in order to finalize our contract details. And then the last update here around the group violence reduction strategy, I'm going to dig more into that when we do the spotlight, but wanted to be really transparent in saying that we're not where we wanted to be at this point with regard to a full launch in the Western, but we are absolutely where we should be right now, given some things that have happened that we'll talk about in a couple of slides. The second pillar revolves around community engagement and interagency coordination, and you'll see that this pillar is a pretty hefty one. Again, just zeroing. Yes.
I'm really curious. I noticed we were behind on GVRS. Are we going to talk about that later on, or?
Maybe my Wi-Fi hiccupped. Yes. So I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that first slide because GVRS is the spotlight slide at the end of this presentation so that we can dig deeply into that.
Got it. Sorry about that. I missed that.
No worries. And so really focusing on where the changes are between September 29th and today, given the schedule, we were supposed to be smack dab in the middle of conducting the community-based organization landscape analysis that would allow us to do some really deep digging into both traditional and non-traditional community-based assets in Baltimore City. While we haven't started that yet, we are in contract negotiations with the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance associated with doing that work. And we anticipate being able to get the work started soon. Again, wanting to be transparent about where we are on the timeline on this. Coming down a couple of rows, The Public Safety Advisory Commission has in fact delivered its first report to the City Council, and is slated to review that report with the mayor in the coming weeks. So we're looking forward to when the hearing will be scheduled in order for Baltimore City residents to share with you all in partnership with the interagency partners that they have, what they've uncovered and what recommendations they have. I also want to be really transparent here in saying that I believe that there are some asks of the council, the City Council office, from the Public Safety Advisory Commission, that we need to make sure that we get filled ahead of that hearing. And we've also completed the Violence Prevention Task Force expansion. This was something that was handed off from the Health Department when they put the framework together, and has been expanded to include other city agencies in addition to community members. And folks are really digging into the work that lies ahead and making some determinations about how they plan on playing a role that's integrated with the Public Safety Advisory Council, integrated with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, so that we are delivering systematically. And then finally, on this slide, we in fact did relaunch the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council since the last time we met. In fact, in our last meeting with the council, we'd already established the 7 named work groups where folks are going to be focusing work for the next 2 years. MONSE has hired a data analytics deputy manager who will be working in partnership with members of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council in those 7 work groups. In our last meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about the Public Safety Accountability Dashboard, which is one of the 7 work groups, and are predicting that in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Performance and Innovation and with the Chief Data Officer, that we'll have a draft of that dashboard ready for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council to see at their next meeting. And then finally, in Pillar 3, before we talk about GBRS as the spotlight here, the Safe Streets evaluation was completed, and we are in the process of finalizing the Safe Streets evaluation report. By the time we meet with you all again, that report will have been made public. It is our plan to release the evaluation in the first quarter of next year. And so well on target there. This report, this evaluation and this report was conducted by MONSE, and really was meant to bring together the qualitative and the quantitative data that we've gotten from academic partners, but to take it a step further and dig deep into the culture and the operational components of how each of the sites are working, while simultaneously holding ourselves accountable as the centralized mechanism that community violence intervention needs to be deployed through. And so I'm really excited about what we'll be able to share with you all in the coming months about what's working well and what we need to change in order to truly scale up community violence intervention, how we're holding ourselves accountable and also holding our community-based partners accountable. And I think that that's the only change on this slide. If there are no other questions, sir, I'm going to jump right into the spotlight.
That sounds good.
All right. So, so the question that you asked me is in the last headline bullet here, and I asked for some grace as I kind of walk through a series of things that have happened leading to this decision. So on December 6th and 7th, our technical advisors visited Baltimore City. Those are national advisors. The National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform is also MONSE's and my technical advisor for the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaboration Program. In addition to them, we've partnered with the California Action Partnership and the University of Pennsylvania, specifically Dr. Anthony Barraga and his team. So what they observed when they came was that BPD-led shooting reviews had vastly improved, that we are appropriately focusing, or we have appropriately focused demonstration enforcement actions. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. That they saw an evolution of our coordination meetings between our justice and our community partners that they were really pleased with. That we've stood up our 2 intervention partners, one to focus on folks who are 25 and older, and one to focus on folks who are 16 to 24, those being YAP and ROCA respectively. And then finally, that our partnership is really strong and that it's diverse, that we are demonstrating a balance of challenge and support to each other in ways that ensure or attempt to ensure that the strategy will be successful this time. Around their immediate recommendations, they were very clear in saying, we've got to hurry up. And by we, I mean Monty. We've got to hurry up and hire folks and empower those folks to make sure that we can coordinate the management cycle and oversee this strategy. We had made 3 hires, quite frankly, and folks were slated to begin in those roles. And the unfortunate reality is that we had someone rescind their acceptance offer after Evelyn Player's death. And so just knowing that this work is work that takes as much as you give. We want to make sure that we've got the right folks in place to get the work done. And so we're actively recruiting right now. In fact, we are interviewing highly qualified candidates this week and into next week to fill Monty's last 2 positions. That one position is the deputy director position, who would oversee coordination in the management cycle. And that second position is the service partner manager. And that person would be responsible for overseeing the day-to-day work of ROCA and YAP. The next item here around immediate recommendations is the reinforcement of oversight and accountability with those community partners. Needless to say, going back to this service partner manager open position, we need someone in Monty who's available every day to work on work plans with these 2 partners, to hold them accountable, to make sure that there's the appropriate oversight. There's also been discussion with our technical advisors associated with inviting our community partners and others into the monthly governance meeting with the tri-party principals to make sure that we are demonstrating the amount of oversight and accountability that needs to be in place, and we will be doing that. And then finally, around the immediate recommendations, getting ourselves ready for scale up. And so as we start to think about where we are, where BPD is, where Monty is, where the state's attorney's office is, we're well on our way. BPD is already engaging from a GVRS perspective, the unit and I'll defer to Deputy Commissioner Briscoe to answer any questions that you all might have about this. But BPD is pretty much staffed up with regard to the group violence unit, and they are actively doing work. They're actively working through investigations, and their outreach team is in place. The conversations that we've been having at this point around scale up is making sure that we give ourselves enough runway to be ready for scale up. And so being really thoughtful about what that means. So laying the groundwork for an expanded problem analysis, figuring out where we would potentially expand into. Those decisions have not been made yet. So making sure that we initiate an advanced planning timeline around what the infrastructural enhancements would need to look like across Monty, BPD, and the SAO to do that. Around community engagement, I know the council knows that we've already completed 5 information sessions and that our input and brainstorming sessions are currently underway. We've had 2 of the 4 This revolves directly around how we bring the right folks to the table to engage with those folks who are at highest risk. And then as we talk about the launch status, I mentioned before to a few folks on the council that the launch of GVRS is not a champagne bottle glass against the side of a yacht. It is very much a staggered approach around deployment. And so we are in fact staggering that approach. We have provided our community-based partners with referrals that they are actively working. As I mentioned before, BPD is also doing work in this space and they can speak to that. With regard to what a full launch looks like, Monsi's got to be staffed appropriately in order to fully launch. And we are anticipating that we'll be ready for a Western District full launch by the first quarter of next year. I will stop here and I'm happy to stop sharing and to answer any questions along with my partners that you all might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Director Jackson. So we're going to open up to questions from the committee. I've got a few on my own. I think, as I said in my opening statement, time is of the essence. I'll be blunt. I'm a little concerned at the pace at which we're rolling out GVRS. I know one of the things we intend to do are call-ins, and I'm curious, do we expect to see some of these steps taken in the coming months in the first quarter?
So I think that it makes sense to, at least for those on the from a public perspective that might be viewing this, to differentiate call-ins from custom notifications, if I could, Councilman.
Please.
So, yep. So with regard to how we engage with folks who are at the highest risk, call-ins typically involve all of our partners, including law enforcement partners, parole and probation, essentially telling folks under their supervision there's going to be a meeting and we're bringing together about 15 to 20 folks for a call-in. A custom notification is one that allows us to engage with anywhere between 1 and 5 individuals, where we're bringing folks who are influencers of those folks into the space and having conversations with them about walking away from the life and sharing with them all the reasons why they should, given information that we've got. I would offer that given conversations with technical advisors, given some conversations about call-ins, how they've worked here in the past and how they've worked across the country in the past, we want to be really thoughtful about the number of call-ins that we're doing compared to the number of custom call-in or custom notifications that we're doing. With that said, I would say that we are targeting doing at least 1 call-in in the next quarter.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to know. And I'll sort of give you my concerns. My concerns now are primarily that we've done, I think, a good job of pulling together this plan. We pulled in the latest and greatest in theory and policy and analysis for the work that we pulled together. Clearly, we're still in the midst of a very, very violent year. I think this is a key part of our success for the future. And I really want to begin to understand what's slowing us down. If we could hone in on that exactly, what's slowing down the rollout for GVRS, and what can we do? How can we help to move it more quickly?
So I think I mentioned a couple of those things. One, being making sure that we've got the right staff in place. And Monty has 3 positions associated with GVRS, and 1 of them is filled. So, and I think I mentioned that before. The other 2 key pieces that I would share, that I may or may not have mentioned, I don't remember whether or not I've mentioned it on this call or not, is preparing for direct communication. We've got to identify who our law enforcement messengers are going to be. We've got to identify who our community messengers are going to be, who have enough influence, quite frankly, to be the right messengers for having this conversation. We've got to train them. We've got to bring them together as a part of a design team to train them on how direct communication and how custom notifications work. It is why we're having brainstorming sessions right now with Baltimore City around direct communication and who are the right people in the Western from a community-based perspective that should be a part of this work. The final piece that I would share is around making sure that our partners are ready. So making sure that our partners are appropriately trained and that there's appropriate oversight and accountability. So that goes back to making sure that staffing's in place and making sure that we've got a clear incentive structure built for the individuals that we're going to be reaching out to who are at highest risk, and making sure that our TA advisors are on the ground to provide the training that both YAP and ROCA need to implement this successfully. And I would offer that we've made a lot of headway in doing that in the past couple of months, that we've seen our partners, our service providers get an uptick in training. We've seen their level of readiness exponentially increase, and we're still working to make sure that that gets done. So those are the three areas that we're focusing on, and I honestly can't say, I honestly can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that those three pieces are in place before this launches, but also how confident we are at this point that we're going to be ready to launch in Q1, given where we are.
So some initial thoughts on that. So we're looking at three major issues. You're saying we have to hire 2 people. The 2 people are going to be the difference between us rolling this out in the next couple of months. That worries me. Also, as far as the messaging, I know we've been doing a ton of messaging, and I dare I say we've been doing a great job and maybe too much messaging. I'd love to do more doing. I'd love to see this off the ground. I'd love to see, more of us actually interacting with the folks that are having these issues and intervening where possible. I think we have an excellent system that can be really helpful if rolled out. And I just really want to see more urgency on this. I know you, Director Jackson, have a small team with limited resources. I don't know if we can borrow or steal resources from somewhere else in the meantime, if we have some smart people that are willing to give us some time. But I'm trying to hide my frustration here. I'm frustrated because I think we're at a point now we're seeing more homicides than we expected when we had grim calculations of that, and I just really want to see this off the ground. So whatever we can do as a council, however we can support. I don't know what we need. It's hard for me to fully accept that hiring 2 people have stopped us from rolling out this pilot, or that communication has been the barrier, because we have certainly been communicating. I think we've been communicating a lot. I think our partners are ready for it. I think we're ready. I don't know what the holdup is. And I think I'm at a crux now. I don't know what to do. How can we help you?
Thank you, Councilman, for the offer of assistance. I share your frustration associated with the loss of life in our city. I think that we all do, and that we all want this to be ready. I get the impression that the reason why this isn't off the ground is because I don't have 2 people. I mentioned staffing as one component of our issue. What we don't want to do is have partners go out there who are not ready and attempt to deliver this message, because that sets us up for a third failure. And so, as I mentioned before, staffing, making sure that our partners are ready, and making sure that we've got the right folks doing direct communication via those call-ins and via those custom notifications are critical pieces. We are making sure that we're moving as quickly as we can and as thoughtfully as we can. There is a high sense of urgency associated with getting this work done. And so I don't want you to think that this isn't a priority for Muncie. It absolutely is. It is our leading approach and strategy for gun violence reduction. And quite frankly, sir, I don't want us to rush the rollout. I understand the sense of urgency. I want to be ready today too. And it's important to the lives of Baltimoreans, to the safety of Baltimoreans, to the freedom of Baltimoreans, that we do this right this time. So I hear you loud and clear. I would offer that the help that the council could provide at this point wouldn't be about trying to go grab some smart people, because there are a lot of smart people that are already doing this work and already in the city. We need the right people to be a part of the staffing model here. That how the council could help is to partner with us in finishing out these last 2 brainstorming sessions. Make sure that we've got enough of Baltimore's voice associated with who we need to have in the room to do these custom notifications. One of the points that I made in a community conversation just over the past couple of days around direct communication is it doesn't matter if I show up for a call-in to give a message. If I don't have any influence over this particular set of individuals that's going to change their behavior. And so when we talk about making sure that we've got the right folks, the right community moral voice messengers, the right law enforcement messengers, the right folks a part of this design work, I can't understate how important that is to the success of this strategy.
I see Councilman Costello's got his hand up. I'll say this though, Director Jasmine, we're all here. I think everybody's willing to throw everything at this problem at this point. And so as a matter of it being the right people, we're here. Right people are here. People who want to be involved are here today. And I think we're ready to go. But Councilman Costello, you had a question.
Yeah. When is it going to be off the ground?
I think I just mentioned that it would be off the ground in the first quarter of next year in the Western District.
Okay. And when we say first quarter, because that's obviously a 3-month period, are we talking beginning in January, end of March, somewhere in the middle?
At this point, our estimate is first quarter, sir.
So just sometime between January 1 and March 31.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You know, I have to say that I've heard a lot of discussion about partnering. And one of the things that you've asked us to do in partnering is to either put our name on these events or to promote these events or to make sure that the right people are at these events. This last series of events that were promoted yet again, located in my district, no heads up, I'm not available. And there's no reach out to my office to try and coordinate. So to me, that really doesn't feel like partnership. So I'll just leave that there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that accountability check, Councilman, and I'll make sure that I take it back to the mayor's office.
It's not the, yeah, I know that it's the mayor's office. It's your office is hosting these sessions in our respective districts, and you're not reaching out to us to let us know when you're doing them. You're doing them on your own time. So that's not a partnership. So, and this is the same discussion that respectfully that we had last year about this whole partnership thing. So this isn't the first time that it's happened, but the response was the same as the last time, which was appreciate the accountability check. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Any questions from the committee? Councilman Glover, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do appreciate, the great work that Ms. Jackson and her crew is doing. It do seems to be like a lack of at times communication, and I think sometimes what what bothers me is that some of the groups that we do have here in my district that are really doing the work. I think I mentioned to you one time before about Uncle T and his organization, where just recently, he's been begging and pleading, even to me, about getting, a roof fixed so that when the rain falls, it doesn't, water doesn't come down on the kid's head. And it's frustrating because we don't have money to get it fixed. And at times I sent letters already to the mayor's office inquiring about funds for this program and other programs in the district. And yet we see nothing. And what it seems to me is that what it seems to the constituents that I represent is like we don't care, and they don't understand that we don't have a budget to take care, certain things. But we're reaching out to the agencies to find out if there are any monies or resources that you guys can provide us with, so we can take care of situations such as a leaking roof when this guy is out there day in and day out. I mean, everybody knows what Uncle T does around the city, but how do we get funds to organizations like Uncle T's that are really on the ground day in and day out, that are really doing the work? I mean, do we come through, Mossy to get them? I mean, we got, $641 million that just came, to the city of Baltimore. Do we, solicit you guys to try to get money from you guys, or do we go in another direction? Can you help me out with that, please? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for your question, Councilman. And thanks for your reference about Uncle T. He and I actually connected back in January after you provided his information, along with another community member providing his information around getting together. I think folks know that on October 1st, Monty did open up a grants portal that was and continues to be publicly accessible for folks. Grants are issued on a rolling basis for organizations who are involved in community violence intervention, victim services, reentry, youth justice, or community healing at different funding levels. And so Uncle T has the option of applying directly there on our website, and or applying directly to the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs for ARPA dollars as well. And I'm happy to continue conversations with him about his program and any way that we can partner.
What I'll do is I'll reach out to Uncle T again, but I'm going off of before we finalize the budget, this past fiscal year, it was conversations of, we'll make sure you guys have the checks to do X, Y, Z, and not yet. I mean, here it is the end of the year, and I have not one check, to come my way to any of the community groups that was promised to get funding through the city of Baltimore. So again, it's frustrating to me because, promises have been made, letters have been signed, and the community groups have seen these letters that have been signed. They even asked to send in their 1089s or whatever. But again, there's no checks to help these small groups that are really doing the work in our neighborhood to be effective, to continue to do the job that they're doing.
I would have to do some investigation on the letters that you referenced that have been signed, because I'm not familiar with those and come back to you with a report, sir.
Okay, I can forward you some stuff from the mayor's office and the chiefs of staff. So I can forward some things over to you.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Before I come back to Councilman Costello, I want to make sure other folks, any questions? Councilman Porter, do you have a question?
No, sir. I was indicating that I was good. I was drinking. Sorry.
Thank you. And Councilman Burnett, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, sorry, okay. Yeah, so I guess the question I had, Director Jackson, is specifically around the timeline for the group violence work. That program in particular, I know that there's been sort of a recalibration of it, but largely there's a lot of precedent for doing this in the past. And so I'm just curious as to what some of the challenges are to getting that off the ground a little bit faster, given the, I guess, the history of this being utilized before. It's not like it's not new. It's not a new program. I know, trying to make it better, but just curious about what's impacting the timeline there for that.
As I mentioned before, there are three major components that are impacting the timeline. I would offer that in the previous iterations, we didn't have the level of service partnership that we have in this administration. We've got a $1.2 million contract with YAP. That's unprecedented. We know from previous attempts at this, one of the things that went wrong is a commitment to provide wraparound services to individuals and then not meet those commitments. And so when I speak about partner preparedness and making sure that folks actually have the appropriate level of training, that there's an incentive structure built with these partners as they work with high-risk individuals to get them to walk away from the life, that's a huge component of this. We want to make sure that they are ready. I understand that we've done this before in the past. We haven't done it quite frankly, like we were supposed to. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't see long-term positive impacts associated with the strategy in the past. And so it really, again, is about making sure that we've got the appropriate infrastructure in MONSE, in our service partners, in our direct communications and how those things are rolled out. That has us to the point of targeting our launch for Q1 of next year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize for my yellow eyes. I was at the doctor or the eye doctor this morning and got the eye drops, so I have that stuff all over my face. Director, I'd like to go back to revisit the staffing challenges that you're having. You indicated that you have a need for 3 people to run this program, and one of those positions is currently filled. And then you mentioned that you made an offer on one of the remaining 2 positions. Is that correct?
No. So leading up into the middle of November, we were slated to have all 3 positions filled effective 11/29. One of the offers that we made was rescinded after the death of Evelyn Player, as I mentioned. One of the other offers that we made was rejected flat out after some consideration.
So the city rescinded one, and the person who received the offer rejected it in the other scenario, correct?
I want to make sure that there's no mistake about what I was saying. So prior to November 29, we had one person in place, the deputy director of the group violence reduction strategy. In doing interviews for the other 2 positions, the service partner manager and the community partnership manager, we found candidates for the service partnership manager, the community partnership manager, and we found a candidate that we thought would be better suited, quite frankly, for the deputy director position because of some previous experience in another jurisdiction doing group violence reduction strategy oversight. We made the offer to that individual. That individual accepted the offer as deputy director and then rescinded the offer.
So, or please pause for one moment, just so I understand. Let me summarize. So you had a deputy, prior to November 29th, you had a deputy director, and then you had identified people for the support position and the community outreach position. You also identified a person who you thought would be better than the current deputy director, made that person an offer, and they rejected that offer?
They accepted that offer, which initiated a transfer of our current deputy director into our into our Deputy Director of Data Analytics position. This staff member is a staff member who had been working with BPD and working with the SAO and working with our office prior to accepting the Deputy Director role on data analytics. And so that person transitioned over into that role, or was scheduled to transition over into that role on 11/29, which was the same day that the new Deputy Director was supposed to start. And so for all intents and purposes, all of the GVRS positions would have been filled on 11/29, in addition to having a data Deputy Director to start to work with us on data tracking, accountability, GVRS stat, all of those pieces.
Okay, so do you currently have a deputy director, this person that you identified from another city?
That's the person that rescinded her offer, rescinded her acceptance.
So she accepted and then rescinded?
After Evelyn Player's death, yes.
Okay. What does Evelyn's death have to do with it?
I think that it spoke to the level of trauma that she was not willing to engage with going
But I thought she did this work in another city.
She did. I'm only communicating to you what was communicated to me by Human Resources. I don't have any more information to share than that.
Okay, so the deputy director position is currently vacant?
Correct.
Okay, what about the, what were the other two positions? One was community outreach, right?
So the service partnership manager and the deputy director positions are currently vacant, and we are currently interviewing for those this week. We plan on making offers by the end of the week next week. Our candidate pool is very strong. What is filled right now is our community partnership manager, who started on 11/29.
So when do you, so you expect to make offers next week on those remaining two positions?
Yes, as I mentioned, as soon as that offer, as soon as those acceptances that turned into declines happened, we immediately reposted the position and have been aggressively recruiting folks. We have been interviewing folks this week, and we'll wrap up interviews next week.
Okay, so when do you expect to, so if you make offers by, let's see, today's the 15th, 17th. So if you make offers, how are you going to be able to make offers on Christmas week? Are you think that your office is going to be prepared to make those offers next week?
Do I believe that my office will work with Human Resources to extend offers next week? Yes.
So who's ultimately responsible, your office or DHR? For getting offers out?
DHR extends the offers. I'm the person that tells them who to extend the offer to.
Okay, so do you believe that you are going to be in a position to tell DHR and give DHR enough time to make those offers next week?
Yes.
Okay, when do you expect those two positions to onboard?
Sometime in mid-January.
I mean, I would think you would have an exact date. So I'm just looking at the calendar now. So you're going to make offers by Thursday, the 23rd, because I assume Friday, the 24th is a city holiday for Christmas. So if you make an offer by the 23rd and DHR communicates that by the 23rd, which I don't think is actually going to happen, but let's just say it does. When do we expect to, what's the period of time that those individuals have to accept the offer?
What's the period of time that they have to accept the offer or to start a position, or both?
Well, if you send me a job offer, I have a certain period of time by which I can either accept or deny, right?
So I can't answer that question from a Department of Human Resources perspective, but I can tell you that I would want to, that as the agency director, I would want to hear back within 48 to 72 business hours, whether or not someone is accepting a position or not. I don't know if there are protocols or procedures that DHR has in place that says, hey, you've got 5 days. I can tell you that for every position that I've offered on my agency, I haven't waited more than 2 to 3 days for someone to accept the position.
I guess my frustration here, Director, is how can we have a conversation about this whole strategy, and you are telling us that you understand the sense of urgency here, but we can't get simple questions answered like how long it's going to take. Like, if this was the top priority for me, I would have had these conversations with DHR to better understand like the exact day that this person can onboard.
So that's going to vary by candidate, sir. I mean, if someone is currently working a job, they might want to offer 2 weeks notice. They might decide individually to quit the same day. They could ask for 30 days notice. That's not something that I can guess. I can tell you that I am planning to begin onboarding for individuals by the middle of January. And the Department of Human Resources doesn't typically start someone until the beginning of a pay cycle.
Okay.
Which means that we would be targeting either January 10th or January 24th, because that's when city pay cycles begin.
So
but individuals are going to have to tell us, if they accept an offer, how much notice they need to give a current employer. And I don't know that I would consider that unreasonable. That's not necessarily something that I've got a lot of control over.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a request for your consideration for the committee to start to receive weekly updates from MONSE until these positions are filled, and what the status is of both of those two remaining positions, considering the sense of urgency that we're all in agreement on that exists here, as well as just how critically important this is, because we're expecting the police department to do things that it's never done before, and it's largely dependent on this strategy. Is that a fair request, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I think so. Director Jackson, is there any problem with that?
I have no problem with providing weekly updates.
Okay, so
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would appreciate if those were submitted by no later than call of business on Friday of each week moving forward until those positions are filled. Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to go back to my previous line of questioning. I know I've far exceeded my 2 questions, so I appreciate your indulgence.
I just want to check to see if any other members have
Yes, sir.
questions before. Any other questions from the committee? Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's very important that we do this strategy correctly. And as frustrated as I hear everybody, and I certainly am frustrated as well, I want to make sure that we do this right. And I think that Director Jackson is trying to move in that direction. Director, if you say that the time frame for rollout is first quarter, which means you're going to be hiring. You've been doing all of this preliminary work. So when these positions come on, what's going to be their immediate role to be able to finish up the work so that we can see the strategy move forward in first quarter?
So the deputy director is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day implementation of the group violence reduction strategy, responsible for coordinating all of the partners in the management life cycle, making sure that we're able to prepare and launch those direct communications that we talked about around call-ins and the custom notifications, and making sure that we can integrate all of our intervention partners into the direct communication work. The service partner manager is going to be responsible for overseeing the day-to-day work of the 2 intervention partners. And so working on the work plans that both ROCA and YAP have, making sure that they're a point of contact every single day around what's happening in the strategy, what the notifications are going to look like, what the anticipated referrals to those agencies are going to be, and making sure that we're timing the delivery of those referrals to the high-risk individuals that need to receive them. It's why it's critical that we bring on someone in the deputy director role who's familiar with the strategy and who can hit the ground running, and that is my full intention.
So I just want to make it clear to what I'm hearing is that we're not starting from scratch in January when they come. You've already done the work of building the partnerships, understanding who's doing what, making sure that they're prepared to do what they're supposed to do as partners of intervention. When somebody comes in, there's an assessment of that person and figure out which partners need to be engaged to be able to address their issue. The work of the partnership development has been done. And the next step is really to put all of the pieces together. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's a very comprehensively concise way of saying it. Yes, ma'am.
I know it's much more complicated than that, but I want to just it seems like a lot of work has been done here. And again, you obviously hear our sense of urgency, but I want to make it clear to my colleagues, we're not starting from scratch when the associate director comes on. All of this work has happened, and that you're putting the right pieces in place based on what you've already done, and so that work is going to move forward. So I look forward to your updates, and I look forward to whatever you need from us to help you move this forward is extremely important. First quarter is vital. So whatever you need from us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Councilwoman Porter.
Director Jackson, what other you mentioned agencies related to hiring. So not only your office, but what other Baltimore City agencies are connected to you that are interdependent with this hiring process as well?
I wouldn't say that there's a strong level of interdependence, Councilwoman. I would say that hiring isn't happening in a vacuum, that all of the interviews are panel interviews that involve me, that involve the Associate Director of Gun Violence Prevention, that involve a technical assistance provider, and that involve the Deputy Commissioner of BPD, to make sure that we only have to have one interview per person. And so that we can stack rank each candidate against the ones before them after each interview, so that we can make swift, efficient decisions based on qualifications.
Sure. Thank you so much for that process. And the only reason why I asked that process is because I want to decentralize this. I want to decentralize the aspect of hiring squarely on the shoulders of MONSE. There are other interdependent agencies here that are affected or participate in this process as well. So, Mr. Chair, to add to Councilman Costello's request, is it possible that we can not only receive reports from MONSE, but also the interdependent agencies that are connected with this, so that we can crosswalk to really understand not only the hiring process of these particular individuals, but the larger question at hand about the hiring in Baltimore City? Thank you.
So, Councilwoman Porter, just to clarify your request, I think it primarily would focus on DHR in alignment.
That's perfect, sir.
Okay.
That's perfect, sir. Thank you.
I'll put out a request to DHR as well to make sure that they're coordinating in the response with Director Jackson. All right. So,
thank you so much.
I want to thank you guys. We do have another hearing right after this, so I want to allow Councilman Costello to ask his questions before we move on to the SEPTED hearing. Councilman Costello, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, I want to go back to the previous concerns I raised about the lack of coordination with city council members directly. In the case of this most recent announcement about, I think there were 3 listening sessions around the GVRS. Whose responsibility is it to reach out to city council members to coordinate in the manner that you were discussing?
From an agency perspective, ultimately the accountability is mine.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. With that, we're going to put our quarterly crime stat meeting in a recess. I want to thank you, BPD, and certainly Director Jackson. Uncomfortable conversations, but certainly we're all taking this very seriously and want to make sure that you have what you need and that Of course, we're holding you accountable to all that we know we need to get done. So with that, we're going to go into recess for that hearing, and we're going to move into our next hearing about sex ed. And I will just read us in. So this is Bill 21-0040R, informational hearing, crime prevention through environmental design, for the purpose of inviting the Director of the Department of Planning, the Commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, the Commissioner of the Baltimore City Health Department, the Commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department, the Acting Director of the Department of Public Works, the Director of the Department of Transportation, the Chief of the Baltimore City Fire Department, the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, the Sheriff for the Baltimore City, the Chief of the Baltimore City School Police, the Director of the Department of General Services, the Director of the Department of Recreation and Parks, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Performance Innovation, to appear before the Baltimore City Council to discuss ways that the city can prevent crime through the concepts utilized in crime prevention through environmental design model. This was, of course, sponsored by myself. For this, for the second hearing, we got a chance to start digging into the data. And in our hearing back in August, and we started digging into the data after that hearing. So I wanted to actually begin walking through some of that data as we've seen. My team has, in the past month, been pulling 301 requests from across the city and plotting it in a map alongside some of the top 10 posts that BPD has identified as having highest incidence of violent crimes. As we looked at the 8 categories, we got some of the, we tried to focus on some of the root environmental causes of crime, from high grass and weeds to housing inspections for vacant buildings and dirty streets, and more. And so what I want to do is I want to pull that up, Sam, if you can get that pulled up. Not yet. Bear with me, folks. We're trying to pull up a couple of slides.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, were you waiting on me to put up slides?
No, I've got
Okay.
Sam working on it over here.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Sorry, folks, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. We'll have the slides up in a moment. All right, folks, we're going to do a 2-minute. Oh, actually, we're not going to do a 2-minute recess because I want to keep this rolling. I know we've held you guys for quite a while, and I want to make sure we get through this. As I was saying, we've been looking at, of course, crime prevention through environmental design, and specifically focusing on some of the 311 requests that tie directly to some of the quality of life issues that we believe likely tie to some of the criminal elements that we've seen in districts. And so we looked at 8 categories of those which you see here: high grass and weeds, traffic calming, issues around trees, rat rub out, dirty streets, dirty alleys, housing inspections for vacant properties, and illegal dumping. And so first we will take a look at the city at large. And so as many of you might expect, this reflects what we see across the city and many of our issues, the black butterfly. Of course, a lot of the issues that we see for those SRs are within the black butterfly. Hopefully that's not a surprise to anybody here. It's unfortunate that it's a reality. So this is just looking at the housing inspection for vacant houses. The next slide, we see the same pattern for high grass and weeds. And then similarly for the next slide, we'll see a similar pattern for dirty streets and alleys, generally focused in East and West Baltimore. We took a look at illegal dumping. And then when we look at neighborhoods and areas that have suffered greater instances of homicides, they also tend to focus within those areas as well, within the black butterfly. So with that, we'll take a look at the top 10 posts. So we'll zoom in. And here we've got posts 212 and 221. And we can see some of the patterns for dirty streets and alleys within these posts. And you can see a pretty significant focus in the top right portion of the screen within one of those posts. The next one, we can see patterns of reports of dirty streets and alleys. Likewise, once again, focused right in one of those posts. Then on to inspections for vacant buildings. Once again, you see it overlapping once again right in that post. On to illegal dumping once again, and I get if you guys don't see a trend here, not much of this is surprising. And so when we compare all these 311 requests to incidents of violent crime, we start to see that these clusters emerge, and we see square blocks where residents are reaching out to the city for help, for city services, and we also see that that's where we see a focus in violence. So it's a similar story in post 331 with 311 requests and violent crimes reported there. And we can move on. And then meanwhile, in West Baltimore, we see the same. We have a consistent and widespread reports of dirty streets and alleys. A request for housing inspections for vacant buildings. And then next you see illegal dumping. And then we have a look at homicides and violent crimes reported under those similar clusters, and it correlates heavily with those issues. Once again, the data shows exactly what we've been talking about here a lot. So with that in mind, I hope that helped people sort of wrap their head around the issues. We've got a lot of rich data from 301 that can probably help us zoom in a little bit bigger if we'd like to, but I really want to continue the conversation here about these pieces. I hear from constituents frequently that um, that well-off neighborhoods wouldn't have to wait so long for city services, or that the city doesn't quite show up in the same way in certain neighborhoods. But as we can see in this map, many of Baltimore's more fortunate neighborhoods don't have to wait as long for a fix to their problems because those problems are not prevalent there. We're seeing these same problems hyper-focused, in fact, in the same neighborhoods year in, year out. I wouldn't be surprised if you go back 10 years, you would see the same thing. And so we have an opportunity. I would suggest to see through on requests for certain categories, not as one-off problems, to dispatch an inspector or a crew to fix and then forget about and come back for the next call, but as patterns for us to begin thinking about systematically how to address, realizing that they're precursors to crime and violence. Every agency has the ability to identify these areas of concern, certainly not just BPD. And so I want to have a discussion about whether or not we're doing that quite yet. So I'll turn it over from here to the agencies for their reports. And I also want to say a special thank you to Councilman Burnett's office and Kim Sawyer, and Rajiv Sharma from the police department for all the help that they've put into pulling this data together and making it sensible. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to agency reports and first kick it off to BPD.
Good afternoon, Chairman Conway. Did you, I'm not sure exactly how you want us to engage in this. Did you want us to pull those slides that we had up from the slide deck from the last hearing to talk about how we're engaging, how we're being proactive and...
Sure, I want to focus on the top 10 posts. So if we could have the discussion about the top 10 posts and how this overlies with those pieces, I think it'd be helpful.
Okay, if you all could give me sharing ability again.
And Michelle, would you mind going through each post, one post at a time? That'd be helpful.
Good afternoon. If you don't mind, I'll take that from Michelle, Chairman Conway.
Thank you, ma'am.
Not a problem. So for 111 post, which is the first one listed, we've had 1 homicide, 8 non-fatal shootings, 3 carjackings, 19 commercial robberies, 27 street robberies, and 0 residential robberies. Looking at the wrong line. It's 65 aggravated assaults and 6 rapes. Likewise, in terms of proactive enforcement, they've had over 2,320 business checks, 729 engagements afoot, 468 car stops, 3,007 directed patrols, 20 field interviews, 34 warrant attempts. What is not listed on your slide deck is any number of, we showed the example for 331's post, but likewise, we're able to capture any 311 requests that our officers are making. They'll enter in their Baltimore@baltimorepolice.org email address to have one of our entries prioritized as an area of concern for public safety, though it's not on the slide. For 331's post, and I can continue on, sir. Do you want me to continue reading through?
Yeah, you can continue.
All right, for 331's post, 12 homicides, 18 non-fatal shootings, 9 carjackings, 2 commercial robberies, 331 street robberies, 1 robbery residence, 40 aggravated assaults, 4 rapes. Likewise, they've had, in terms of proactivity, 3,970 business checks, 2,572 foot patrol engagements, 904 car stops, 2,512 directed patrol, 127 field interviews, 155 warrant service attempts, and 12 bike patrols. For post 114 in the central, There have been 4 homicides, 6 non-fatal shootings, 1 carjacking, 12 commercial robberies, 37 street robberies, 3 residential robberies, 42 egg assaults, and 5 rapes. Likewise, there have been 4,215 business checks, 1,296 foot patrols, 791 car stops, 5,120 directed patrols, 119 field interviews, 32 warrant service attempts. For 835 posts in the Southwest District, 9 homicides, 7 shootings, 5 carjackings, 14 commercial robberies, 24 street robberies, 6 robbery residents, 39 aggravated assaults, 0 rapes. Likewise, in proactivity, 5,315 business checks, 722 foot engagements, 1,041 car stops, 2,703 directed patrols.
Deputy Commissioner,
Sir.
for these, would you mind sharing for each one how long they've been on this top 10 list? I think that would be helpful as well in understanding how long we've been dealing with issues in these respective posts.
And Mr. Chair, do we have a map to show where these are? Or did we do that last time? I'm sorry if we did.
I do not have a map readily available for all the posts that's condensed. I used the SEPTED example for 331's post overall, but I do not in my slide deck have a map of all of these posts in a way that you can see them at your fingertips. I know,
Councilwoman, we'll see if we can pull one up with the post on it. We do have a map.
Thank you. I'm so much better with a map.
It's much
Thank
harder.
you.
I totally agree with you. Just to see the numbers doesn't tell you where it is. And yes,
Yeah,
1 second.
do you want me to pause, sir? While
You can continue. We'll work on that while you're speaking through the metrics.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Councilman Ramos. Perspective is everything. 123 post, there's 6 homicides, 14 non-fatal shootings, 5 carjackings, 4 commercial robberies, 18 street robberies, 3 residential robberies, 49 aggravated assaults, and 4 rapes. Likewise, in terms of proactivity, 3,174 business checks, 1,014 foot patrols, 858 car stops, 5,515 directed patrols, 46 field interviews, and 126 warrant attempts. For 221's post, it's in the Southeast District, 4 homicides, 10 non-fatal shootings, 1 carjacking, 1 commercial robbery, 31 street robberies, 6 residential robberies, 37 aggravated assaults, and 4 rapes. For proactivity on this post, 1,968 business checks, 1,099 foot patrol, 848 car stops, 5,276 directed patrol deployments, 16 field interviews, 240 warrant attempts. The next post is 922's post in the Southern District, 3 homicides, 17 shootings, 6 carjackings, 1 commercial robbery, 14 street robberies, 8 residential robberies, aggravated assaults are 38, and rapes are 6 rapes. Likewise, in proactivity, 3,421 business checks, 293 engagements afoot, 805 car stops, 1,588 directed patrol deployments, 64 field interviews, 253 warrant attempts. 631 post is the number 7 of the top 10. 4 homicides, 4 shootings, 3 carjackings, 15 commercial robberies, 19 street robberies, 1 residential robbery, 37 aggravated assaults, and 2 rapes. For proactivity, 12,284 business checks, 103 foot engagements, 355 car stops, 2,898 directed patrol deployments, 19 field interviews, and 221 warrant attempts. 9th is 134's post in the Central District, 2 homicides, 7 non-fatal shootings, 4 carjackings, 10 commercial robberies, 24 street robberies, 2 residential robberies, 33 aggravated assaults, and 3 rapes. Likewise, for proactivities, 2,613 business checks, 176 foot and patrol engagements, 246 car stops, 935 directed patrol deployments, 20 field interviews, 33 warrant attempts. Last but not least is the Southwest District. Again, there are 834 posts, 5 homicides, 11 non-fatal shootings, 5 carjackings, 4 commercial robberies, 18 street robberies, 6 residential robberies, 30 aggravated assaults, 3 rapes. For proactivity is 2,715 business checks, 1,730 engagement of foot, 1,072 car stops, 4,488 directed patrols, 20 field interviews, and 276 warrant attempts. And I think Director Campbell is also on. If he is able to speak, I knew he was asking to get elevated. He was having some technology issues, so he had to log off and log back on. He can speak to the timing and methodology. These posts did shift from a little earlier this year as a result of deployments. Again, we evaluate the data, and the top 10 posts do shift based on crime. Director Campbell, are you able to speak to the second part of Chairman Conway's question?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, so I think that the thing is that because we do things district-based, like every commander will understand which of these posts is their hot button issue. And you know,
Excuse me, Director Campbell, I do want to pause you real quick. Michelle, can you take down the screen? We're going to try and get the map up so that folks can understand where these locations are.
I have it ready to send. I'm having issues hitting send for some reason, unless you already have it at your disposal. If not, give me 3 minutes and I'll send you the packet that we have.
Okay. That's fine. I'm sorry, Director Campbell, please.
It's quite okay, sir. You know, I think the challenge is that you'll see these posts a lot of times represented in the Q4 crime plans, the annual crime plans the districts will have. And so we don't track them necessarily centrally as posts because, to the Deputy Commissioner's example, we had some changeover, right? So when we pulled the top 10 posts at the end of November in preparation for the meeting and to get ready, then we pulled it again, I'd say, maybe a week ago, and one of the posts had bumped out, right? So there was I think it was 834 had replaced post 212. I don't want to get stuck on top 10 because, clearly the top 5, maybe if they don't move, as we do some analysis and look at these 5 never move, we're going to go to the district commanders and they're going to say, yeah, absolutely. And we're going to build our crime plans around the issues happening in those. I also am I don't want to say nervous, but I'm cognizant that post boundaries don't always reflect crime boundaries. So I don't want to get stuck based on a line on a map. So I want to give freedom to say, here's the problem area and here's what we need to do. Yep, absolutely. And again, like if you look at in the presentation that Deputy Commissioner did, the post in the Northwest District had a tremendous amount of business checks, right? And so that's because they have a large number of businesses up in that area. And so when you're trying to find the secret sauce to figure out what the productivity is that's best for each one, it really depends on, I think, what you have there, right? So business areas are going to have more business checks, and you're going to have more bike patrols or foot posts in other areas. So I'm happy to answer more if you have.
Sure, it'd be helpful, and maybe for the future for us to keep track of how long these posts remain in the top 10, just showing that maybe we should think about deployment or resources or city responses for other issues as maybe priorities for the ones that are there repeatedly. So yeah, this is really helpful.
Sure.
And Councilwoman Ramos, this is what you were looking for, just to get a sense of where these locations were. I wish we could have both that chart and this map up at the same time so you could understand the types of crime we're seeing in them. But if you recall, 331 was pretty rough from a violence perspective. But we see a number of these issues across these various.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great for every time that we meet to because by doing these hearings, we're really seeing the overlap of the other issues in the communities as well. And so maybe we can prepare, and I'll be happy to help. okay, so these are the top 10 polls this time, and they're still, we're still not making headway on vacant properties here, or we're still having problems with, that, and so just to try to make the case that, violence prevention is more than just, the police and the people. It's actually like the environment. It was the whole point here. And then of course with my priority around housing, that is really critical. And so if for instance, Mr. Chair, you're talking about, how often these top 10 areas stay the top 10, well, then that's a red flag. Like, what else is going on there that we should be addressing if they continue to be in the top 10? So I think that this is a really great exercise, and then we can, overlay that with some of the other data, and then be able to work with the agencies on real focused work in those areas. And I think that would, be very helpful from not only the data perspective, but actually reducing the gun violence and violence in those areas. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for doing this. Appreciate it.
And thank you. We can start off maybe with 331. What are some of the sort of hotbed areas in 331 where we see instances frequently occurring?
Mr. Chairman, two things. The committee members and council staff should have the packet that includes an overall map of Baltimore City with each of these posts, but also maps of each corresponding post. And then is it possible, especially for post 331, we do have 2 slides referencing that post. Could we pull that up?
I think so. Give me one second. You mean is this the police slides that we had?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
I'm just waiting for permission to share. As soon as it comes through, I'll pop it up there.
I think Sam's just going to pull it up here. There we go. Great. So this is 331 here. And this has got a number of things. And I want to be clear. I think I want to hear from some of the other agencies as well. And I know we haven't gone through specific reports, but if the other agencies would like to provide additional insight, HCD, MONSE, others, about some of the stuff we're doing in 331 or otherwise, that'd be really helpful. Sure. Maybe a better question would be, Deputy Commissioner Briscoe, can you speak to some of the quality of life issues that we see in this post? And then maybe we can circle back to the corresponding agency and understand how we've been tackling issues as a result. So we can start there.
Thank you, sir. So in the previous slide, what you see in the red dots are the vacant building notices. In the slide one before, I don't know what's progressing the slide, the top slide, just before it, that has a bit more color to it. And then the blue dots are the recently rehabbed vacant buildings. Yep, that one right there. Thank you so much. The green crosses are vacant lots. The shaped purples are owner occupied. And then you slide down under public ownership. It talks about the housing authority in that rust goldish color. And in the turquoise property owned by mayor and city council. The red rings are planned demolition. And the browner rings or goldish rust is a completed city demolition. And then this is the outline of it. This blue hue is the post itself, which denotes 331's post. And when I read off to you a little earlier all of the crime, and just for the sake of the example, I'll talk about the number of incidents again on this post. On this one post has been 12 homicides, 18 non-fatal shootings, 9 carjackings, 2 commercial robberies, 31 street robberies, 1 robbery residential, 40 aggravated assaults, and 4 rapes. And though I can tell you that the district has, in their Q4 plans, they have focused a great deal of effort and energy because this post was driving their overall district violence. But to the point of environmental design challenges, they have entered in asks of other city agencies. For instance, they've entered in 8 illegal dumping to HCD, 4 dirty alley cleaning requests, another SIU, a cleanup, but there's 3 of those, dirty streets, 3 of those, abandoned vehicles request for towing, 2, sanitation of a property, 2, mixed refuge, 1, tree inspection because there was an issue with a tree, traffic signal repairs, fire protection, animal restraint or animal control, 1, traffic sign request, 1, fallen limb, more for forestry, 1 more, street lights out, and vacant building requests. So as the officers are working the post, to include neighborhood coordinating officers, as they're problem solving and we're seeing crime, we're responding to it not just by our traditional deployment strategies, but a part of our strategies are now partnerships. So in our ComStat 360 with equity, there is an entire page that we're asking district commanders, what other relationships and resources are you partnering with, are you working with to be able to address any crime problems that you're seeing? So that district commanders are required to enter in and show how they're problem solving. And that is also a metric that we're using as an overall evaluation of leadership. Like, are you leveraging all the relationships? So we've trained our team to be able to use the 311 app, to be able to use the data. I can tell you our city partner came in to train our NCO teams, our neighborhood coordinating officer teams, to ultimately train the trainer to train our line officers on how to use the data portal to understand when they're out patrolling, what they see in terms of environment and who they can reach out to get further assistance for problem solving with community. And I'll pause there, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I want to kick this over to housing. Do we have a representative from housing that can speak to us a little bit about what we're doing so far as prevention and enforcement with regard to illegal dumping? I see we have 8 requests submitted from BPD, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have a bunch others hanging out there if we went into our other map. And then also, I noticed a ton of vacant buildings, certainly along the northern part of that corridor. I think is that Monument Street? Do we have a representative from HCD?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for DHCD. We do have some talking points prepared for this evening about our work, not only in this location, but also in the other 9 posts that were identified. I will say that this is the first time we're seeing these particular marking posts, so to speak, for the agency, but we have started to develop our own metrics that we expect to be able to bring to these soon-to-be quarterly meetings. And I can either dive into it now, or if you want to wait to kind of do our full report, we can do it then.
Would you be able to just, since we're focused on 331, and I think this is going to be a pretty much example of how we begin to think through each of the posts, would you be able to talk to 331 specifically?
Sure. 331, some of the marking posts that we've been using, and we will update this when we receive copies of the slides from not only your office, but from BPD. We've been looking at acquisitions in the area. There's been 2 acquisitions, 21 demolitions, 1 home buying incentive. There's been 2 rehabs, 3 relocations, 15 stabilizations. We also have 16 properties in active receivership, 1,074 vacant building notices, 221 vacant buildings that have recently been rehabbed, and we also have 348 properties currently under permit in that 311 post area. And for future meetings, we will include some of the additional metrics that have been laid out in both your presentation and BPD.
Stephanie, I don't know if you have this on offhand, but how many homes are in this post?
Unfortunately, I don't have that number offhand, but that is something I can circle back to the committee with.
Sure. I think beginning to understand the vacancy rate, the rate of permits and work going on in the post, I think is helpful in understanding the relative health of that area and how we can continue to think about spurring growth and investment in the area.
Hi, this is Kate Edwards. I'm the Acting Deputy Commissioner for the Development Division at DHCD. And I just wanted to add too that this post is one of our impact investment areas. This is an area that we're working and coordinating with city agencies, meeting regularly with community partners to develop strategies in this area. So we meet on a quarterly or monthly basis with all of the different agencies, and we're putting together block level plans. We've worked with the neighborhood to identify, on a property by property basis, different strategies throughout this neighborhood. And we're also doing a lot of acquisition in this area. So I know that only one was mentioned, but there are several vacant lots that we've been working on acquiring through tax sale foreclosure in this area. So the goal with that activity of acquisition and then future disposition of properties is to assemble sites in the area to assist with redevelopment activity. So those are some of the ways that we're also helping to move these areas forward, is through that block level planning work. So I just wanted to mention that because this is one of our, like I said, our impact investment areas. So we've been doing a lot of work in this area.
And Mr. Chair, this is Deputy Commissioner Booker. I want to also add from the inspection space. When you look at this post, this Broadway East post, we recognized many years ago that it was a lot of demand in this space. So we divided it into two inspection zones, two inspection territories, if you will. Federal Street is the street that divides both of them. So Federal Street to North Avenue to the north and Federal Street down the Biddle to the south is the second territory. What you should know is we have two inspectors that operate in this footprint in a proactive way. We respond to 311 requests and are proactively putting in 311 requests to support the crime fight. When you look at that red dot up on Gay Street, that's a historic challenge for all of us because that's where the methadone clinic is, and that's where a whole bunch of people hang out. So we do what we need to do to support the crime fight. Anytime there's a fatal or non-fatal, my special operations team reacts to those incidents to do environmental assessments, and we do that across the city. So in this particular footprint, we got two inspectors that are active in addition to the special operations unit as needed.
That's very helpful to know. Thank you, Eric and Kate. Thanks for speaking up. Very helpful to know that we got a couple of initiatives already going in the area. I'm curious, out of the city agencies, I know, and this is sort of the danger in having city agencies. Could anybody be responsible, perhaps, for coordinating efforts, making sure that things are followed up and followed through? And this is not an ask to BPD because I don't think BPD has the capacity nor expertise to do this, but who would be best suited to make sure that things are actually followed up, followed through, and addressed in this area? I don't know who that question goes to.
Well, I would say that with our impact investment work that I was mentioning, that is kind of one of the key things that we're doing. We're coordinating on a regular basis. Communities are communicating some of their concerns, and then we're following up. We're creating action items that we follow up with each agency on. So that is incorporated into that work, and that's with us in partnership with the planning department as well. So that's part of what we're doing with that impact investment area work. So it may not capture everything that you're talking about, but it does capture some of the top items for the community.
And as I stated, I have inspectors in the space every day. So they are, in fact, the forward observers. Stuff that we tag for cleaning, boarding. You probably have seen some of our orange markings on debris. That's just an indication to the public that we have in fact been there and identified it. And then we circle back, and when stuff continues to grow, we escalate it because we know DPW is pressed for manpower.
Got it. And I noticed Dan from OPI is on. Dan, do we have the capacity within OPI to help keep track of progress on SRs and follow up and follow through within these posts? Is that something we can do?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, we, through our Clean Stat meeting, we're looking at a number of types of SRs and tracking agency performance. We do look at, disaggregate by geography. Again, if it's a layer that, that our leadership were able to kind of define and kind of fit into the overall meeting, it's something we could potentially look at. There's some, different ways that we've been looking at the intersection of, violence and environmental conditions in the city. We've both been doing that in, our Clean Stat meeting, and also more recently in our Police Stat meeting as well. These are, there's a lot of different SRs and issues we're looking at in these meetings. So, again, I think it's just a matter of, finding the, both the bandwidth and the, to cover all these, all the issues.
Okay. Yeah, I think I totally understand. I know you guys are trying to measure and account for a lot. I do think it would be helpful if we had some way to follow up and make sure that there's a coordinated effort. And certainly we can try to bustle through that here in this committee. But I think having that consistent follow through amongst the various agencies, I think is something that we don't have a clear mechanism to do so far. Thank you, HCD, and thank you, Dan. One moment. Councilman Ramos, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I don't know if Director Jackson is still on here, but I wanted to see, and maybe we can do it for next time, sort of where the top 10 posts were. And I know that her office did research on where some of the hotspots are for gun violence as well, and are starting the GVRS in certain areas in Western District. And I wanted to see how that coordinated, because here we are coming up with a strategy for the top 10 and how we're going to do that. But I wanted to make sure that we're also doing this work. And after talking with Commissioner Kennedy and a few others, that there's this kind of work being done in those neighborhood project areas. I forgot what they were called. That Monsi is working on. And two, I'd like us to look at some of the work that BNIA has been doing and saying. With the 20 years of data that BNIA has been collecting, we now have amazing trend data that talks about, if something is working, how the indicators are going high. If it's not working, it's going low. They also have said that if you get vacancy down to between 4 and 7% in a block, that is the turning point for making sure that those areas are going to be successful, and that crime is down, and all these other things that we're talking about. So to me, this kind of strategy that we're thinking through, and really citywide, but if we're going to go place by place, we should be looking at what are the indicators we're going to be tracking. How are we going to make those investments to make sure we get down to that 4% vacancy, and how we are all working together with those metrics. So I'd like to just make that suggestion, Mr. Chair, if we're going to be utilizing these meetings or separate meetings to sort of look at the 10 posts, the other environmental factors, and what are those going to be those indicators where we're going to see that we're actually being successful. And again, BNIA has my baby. I'm so proud of where it's gone and what it's doing. But we started it for this very reason, was to be able to work on policy issues based on data, and now we have all these this amazing trend work. So I would just like to make that suggestion as we move forward, and maybe Mr. Chair, I could talk about how we want to do that, but including BNIA based on their analysis of what happens in neighborhoods and making those investments in those key areas based on that is going to be extremely important. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great suggestion. And I know worked with Bina a lot back in the day, and they have a lot of great data, a lot of perspective, and they've done a ton of work that could possibly be helpful here. I see, Nick, you were popping up. You have something you want to add?
Sure. I thought I would just maybe respond to the councilwoman's, and then if Director Jackson wants to follow up, she will. But I just wanted to generally say, first of all, we don't generally use police posts as our way of organizing information. So we'll take a little bit more time to really break down exactly where our Safe Street sites will fall into these districts, as well as some existing programs. I'll mention that neighborhood policing plans are probably the closest we have to a new CEPTED.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Sorry. Thank
you.
you.
No problem. And that's a strong partnership between us and the police department. And right now the pilots are in South Baltimore with the Greater Baybrook Alliance as our partner, kind of that Brooklyn Curtis Bay area, as well as the Fayette Street outreach. And so those two pilots are ongoing. And we already have secured some fundings from the American Rescue Plan Acts to then scale up that pilot to across the city. So that'll be very exciting. And really, instead of it just being the city providers who are looking at to make these improvements, we're really trying to engage the public to help direct us to what would make them feel safer as well, and kind of pinpoint the problem areas since they live in those areas. For the group violence reduction strategy, we are very much trying to make sure that place-based interventions are kind of part of this, even though that's more of a person-based intervention. I've actually learned a ton from Eric Booker and Dewan Sanders, who are on this call, who've been just really amazing partners who really do this kind of every day and educating us about some opportunities. And we've been working, while we talk about housing, we also want to talk about other kind of environmental factors around there and code enforcement. And so that's been an educational process as we get our MOUs ready and get ready for the launch of GVRS. So I also wanted to thank those partners who've been really willing to step up and help us here. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of come back and give a little more details about how these place-based strategies kind of map onto these districts, but these are things that we're piloting now and expected to start with the partners expanding next year. And I will say, I want to thank the Office of Performance Innovation. We mentioned we have a new data analytics manager who is now joining Director Jackson on the Clean Stat meetings to be able to really help us get really into the detail and operationalize with our other programs some of the great data that they're already collecting. And Justin, from the Chief Data Officer, he's been preparing for a while these reports about shootings and how it kind of maps onto service requests, kind of preparing for the coordinated shooting neighborhood response. So I believe Terrence Nash might be here from the State's Attorney's Office to also kind of talk a little bit about that program that we're looking to launch next year.
And if I add one more thing, Councilwoman Ramos, for GVRS, it wasn't solely about the post in and of its single self. It was really the compilation of data where non-fatal shootings and homicides were concerned over a 5-year period, district per district, and over a 5-year, the Western had the highest number of non-fatal shootings and homicide is why we're piloting there. To Nick's point, we are looking at the places where the groups operate, but the strategy of GVRS is largely, as you know, people-based, but we do pay attention to the place that the people are operating in. And as stated, we're doing our neighborhood policing pilot in the Western District at the lower end with the Fayette Community Street community outreach.
Thanks for that clarity in terms of how that was determined. I know in this committee, the chair was looking at top 10 posts, and that could change periodically, but you've done a sort of longitudinal analysis to see where traditionally there's been issues, and that's where that comes from. So I appreciate that. So I certainly want to make sure that we're looking at this, strategy when we're looking at the environment in those areas as well. And again, as we sort of go through this every so often where we see the top 10 posts change, we may see some crossover, hopefully, and then actually working on those pieces. So, but thanks for making the differentiation for me. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. And as a matter of process within the GVRS strategy, and I'm saying it in a high level, so let me bring it up. When I say we look at place, we're looking at the environment to say what's happening in this environment that these people are able to, the groups are able to thrive and live. And if that's the issue of trash, lighting, housing, we're making those referrals, and we're also entering that information into 301 and helping the community educate them as to how to do that as well. So it's a part of the strategy by examining place. But I didn't want you to think we would see it and walk over top of it. We don't. That's the question that we ask ourselves. How can we inform place better as we deal with any of the people within the place?
No, and I think we're all on the same page here that we've got to look at what's going on in the neighborhood in order to really make an impact. It's not just relying on BPD or, people-based strategies, but we've got to really address the environment as well. So I just happen to focus on the vacant property side, but there's, a lot of other pieces as well. Thanks.
So thank you, Councilwoman. I'm very cognizant of folks' time. We're now at 3.5 hours. We've discussed a lot in these hearings. What I'd like to do is, I know some folks may have some questions they want to address now. I'm going to open the floor to those questions. However, what I think we're going to do is, after that, close this hearing and revisit this in the new year. I think we have something scheduled for January that may be a better suit to dig into some of these issues, given we haven't had as much time as I'd like to dig into the post-specific issues. So with that, are there any other questions from the committee before we close out the hearing? All right, I don't see any questions. I'm going to hold my questions until the next time. I hope folks found this helpful. I think we'll get a little closer to a better flow and how to get through all these, but I certainly for me, it's been helpful to see this data laid on top of each other so that we can understand how other agencies play a role in this. With that, we are going to give you back the last 30 minutes of your day before you go home or stay home. Really appreciate you guys. This is probably going to be a happy holidays and happy new year to many of you. Really appreciate all the hard work you guys put in. And I know we asked very tough questions, but we really do appreciate the hard work, the public service, the tough questions, and the honest answers. So appreciate you guys and look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Have a good night.